Imagine walking into a room and not needing to prove anything. Imagine staying calm when someone tries to push your buttons and feeling in control even when everything around you is loud and messy. Now ask yourself honestly, how often do you speak too quickly, react too fast, or say things you later regret? Most people don't realize this, but the way you use your words or hold them back can completely change your life. If you speak with purpose, with control, with calm, you gain respect, clarity, and peace. But if you talk too much, complain, or always try to explain yourself, you give away your power without even knowing it. Today, you're going to discover how silence, yes, silence, can make you stronger, wiser, and more respected. These aren't just tips. These are ancient Stoic tools used by some of the wisest people in history. Tools that will help you stop reacting, stop explaining, and start leading your own life with quiet strength. So get ready, because once you learn this, you'll never see your words or your silence the same way again. Before we begin, I want you to make a decision, a small but powerful one. Write this in the comments. I choose silence. You're not just writing a sentence, you're sending a message to your mind. A message that says, from now on, I speak less, think more, and live with purpose. So write it down, and let's begin this journey into real, lasting strength. There are moments in life when the right thing to say is nothing at all. You feel the tension in the room. A harsh comment is thrown your way. A mistake is made. An opportunity to show off presents itself. Your body wants to speak. Your ego begs for attention, but your wisdom tells you to wait. This is the moment where many people fail, not because they don't know what to say, but because they don't know when to say it. The people who hold power, who influence silently, who stay calm when others are loud, they are playing a different game, a deeper game, one where silence is not weakness, it's strategy. When you hold back your words in a high-pressure moment, you create space. That space gives you room to think, to breathe, to observe what others miss. Most people rush to fill silence with words, believing that action equals sound. But the strongest moves are often made without a word. The silence becomes a tool, a way to control the pace, redirect energy, and increase impact. In conflict, silence becomes a mirror. When someone is angry or disrespectful and you don't match their tone, you reflect their behavior back at them. They hear their own voice echo in the room, louder than they expected. You show them their own aggression without feeding it, and suddenly they are forced to confront themselves. This is not passive behavior. It's active discipline. People expect you to react. They're counting on your need to defend yourself, to explain, to attack back. When you don't, they're left with their own noise. That discomfort teaches them more than your words ever could. It shows them that you are not easily moved, not easy to provoke. And over time, it builds a quiet kind of respect, the kind that doesn't need to be announced. Opportunities also test our silence. Let's say you're in a meeting or in a group setting where people are throwing out ideas. Many will speak first, trying to impress. But the person who listens first and speaks last speaks best, because by then they've already heard the gaps. They've seen who's insecure, who's bluffing, and who's pretending. They don't waste words, they speak with precision, and when they do speak, everyone listens. Strategic silence gives you control, not over others, but over yourself. And once you can master your own reactions, there is very little in this world that can control you. Because words can create conflict, but silence creates focus. And when you're focused, you make better choices. You don't burn bridges with heat-of-the-moment words. You don't give away power trying to win arguments that don't matter. You stay clear, you stay clean, you stay calm. One of the most powerful things you can do when someone accuses you of something unfair or questions your value is to say nothing. Not because you're afraid, but because you know that your actions will speak louder over time. You don't waste time proving your truth to someone who isn't really listening. You stay grounded, and in doing so, you rise above the situation. Restraint is not taught in schools. It's not rewarded in most workplaces. We are trained to respond, to react, to prove. But the people who rise to real power are often the ones who speak less and do more. They observe the game, read the room, and only enter the conversation when it actually matters. And when they do, their voice carries weight, not because it's loud, but because it's rare. Holding silence also allows you to gather information. While others are exposing their intentions, their fears, their weaknesses, by speaking too soon, you are collecting data. You are learning who is driven by ego, who is calm, who is insecure, who is manipulative. You become the person who knows what others don't. And in any room, the one who sees the most holds the most potential. There's a reason why Stoics trained themselves to wait before responding, because they knew that in every delay is a window of clarity. A second of space can save you from days of regret. When you don't react immediately, you give yourself a chance to respond intentionally. And intentional responses build trust, while impulsive reactions destroy it. You may think silence makes you look unsure or weak, but the truth is, most people fear silence because it forces them to sit with their own discomfort. If you can sit in silence while someone challenges you or disrespects you or tries to provoke you, you are showing a level of control that speaks for itself. This kind of strength also affects your body. When you learn to stay calm and quiet under pressure, your breathing stays steady, your heart slows down, your muscles stay relaxed. You are not just mastering your words, you are mastering your state. And that changes everything, from how you make decisions to how others feel when they're around you. Strategic silence also lets you lead without shouting. People who speak constantly often lose impact, but the ones who speak rarely, but with clarity, become trusted voices. They are the ones others turn to in crisis, not because they always have the answer, but because they've trained themselves not to add to the chaos. There is something magnetic about someone who doesn't rush to speak. You lean in, you wonder what they're thinking. You start to listen more carefully, hoping to catch the moment they choose to speak. This is the kind of influence you want, not forced, earned. Many people destroy relationships by saying too much when they're hurt. They lash out, send long messages, try to control the other person's view of them. But silence, when used well, keeps your dignity. It shows that you don't need to explain your value. It says, I know who I am, even if you don't. In business, silence is an advantage. When negotiating, the person who can sit in silence the longest often wins. Why? Because silence creates pressure. Most people are uncomfortable with it and will break it by revealing something they didn't mean to share. But if you can sit with that pressure and wait, you will often come out with better terms, better deals, and better outcomes. But silence doesn't mean inaction. It means acting with intention instead of reaction. It means choosing your words like a sculptor chooses where to cut the stone, carefully, with a vision. Not every moment needs your voice. Not every insult needs your reply. Not every opportunity needs your explanation. You are not here to convince the world. You are here to lead yourself. And leaders are not made through noise. They are made through presence, through the kind of presence that speaks even when they don't say a word. One reason silence works is because it helps you listen better, not just to others, but to yourself. Underneath all the noise of the world, there's a voice inside you that knows what to do. But if you're always talking, always reacting, always filling the space, you can't hear it. Silence reconnects you with that inner knowing. It helps you make decisions that are aligned, not just reactive. And when you stop needing to have the last word, you start to gain real confidence. The kind that doesn't need attention. The kind that doesn't break when someone misunderstands you. Because your peace isn't tied to what others think. It's built on something stronger. Discipline. Think of a person who's always trying to win every conversation. They get louder, more aggressive, more desperate to be right. That person may win an argument, but they lose respect. Now think of someone who listens more than they speak, who chooses their words wisely, who isn't afraid of silence. That person may say less, but when they speak, people stop and listen. That's the kind of person you want to be. Every time you choose not to react in anger, every time you hold back a comment you know is unnecessary, every time you choose silence over gossip or judgment, you are building something inside you, something strong, something centered, something powerful. This is not a skill that comes overnight. It takes time. It takes mistakes. You will speak too soon sometimes. You will regret a few words. But the more you practice restraint, the easier it gets. And soon, people around you will feel the shift. They will sense that you are not like everyone else, that you don't need to fill the silence, that you own it. And what happens next is simple. People begin to respect your boundaries. They stop expecting you to explain everything. They stop pushing you for a reaction. They start listening more when you speak, because they know you won't speak unless it matters. You won't need to tell people who you are. They'll feel it, because silence, when backed by presence, speaks louder than words ever could. So next time you're in a moment of tension or temptation or opportunity, pause. Hold your ground. Let the silence do the heavy lifting. Let your restraint become your reputation. And watch how your life begins to shift, not with noise, but with power, quiet, calm, unshakable power. Silence creates space, and within that space, a question appears. What else have you been avoiding? What truths are buried beneath comfort? What strength has never been tested because your days are too soft, too safe, too easy? If silence is power, discomfort is the forge where that power is shaped. Most people think strength comes from doing more, lifting heavier, working longer, speaking louder. But true strength begins when you step into something uncomfortable and choose to stay. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because you understand what it gives you in return. Control, discipline, clarity, unbreakable calm. Voluntary discomfort is one of the most effective tools to train the mind. When you choose to make your life harder in small, controlled ways, you prepare yourself for the real storms, the ones you don't see coming. Cold showers, early mornings, fasting, silence, discipline in daily choices. These are not punishments, they're invitations. Each one says, "Come meet the edge of your comfort. Come see what lives beyond it." You start by doing something simple that most people avoid. You wake up early, not because you have to, but because you can. There's no one forcing you, no prize, just a decision. Your body wants more sleep, but you get up, and in that quiet, when it's still dark outside, you already feel different. You've made a small promise and kept it, and something inside you clicks. I am stronger than my moods. You take a cold shower. It shocks your body. Your instinct says step out, but you stay in. Not for glory, not for social media, just to practice keeping your word when comfort says otherwise. That discomfort sharpens your awareness. It wakes you up in ways that coffee never could. Your breath shortens, but your focus deepens. You've already faced resistance before the world even asked anything of you. You begin to fast, not forever, just long enough to feel hunger. And then you realize, hunger is not the enemy. You can sit with it, observe it, control it. You're no longer a slave to cravings. Your mind becomes clearer, your emotions steadier. You eat not to feel better, but to nourish. You stop chasing food as a way to escape boredom, anxiety, or stress. You take control, and food loses its control over you. Discomfort changes your relationship with time. You stop expecting every moment to feel good. You start seeing value in doing hard things, in waiting longer, in working through fatigue. When everyone else takes the easy road, you take the one with more resistance, not because it's harder, but because it builds you. You start noticing how people around you avoid discomfort at all costs. They complain when the weather is bad. They panic when they're bored. They scroll endlessly to avoid stillness. But not you. You sit with the boredom. You walk through the rain. You feel the tension rise, and you don't run from it. You don't look for a distraction. You look inward. Your emotions, once quick to flare, begin to settle. You don't snap like you used to. Discomfort has taught you that feelings come and go, but actions can stay strong. You stop needing every situation to go your way. You start choosing patience because you've learned to sit in the fire without burning up. Voluntary discomfort reveals who you really are when there's no reward on the line, when it's just you and the choice to stay in the hard moment or walk away. Most people think they're disciplined until life puts pressure on them. You don't wait for that pressure to arrive, you invite it, not recklessly but purposefully. So when the real trials come, you're already prepared. When you train this way, you don't fear hard conversations. You don't panic in uncertainty. You've built mental armor by walking into small discomforts again and again. You've faced your limits, and each time you've stepped past them, not all at once, but piece by piece, day by day. This changes your identity. You no longer call yourself weak, unmotivated, or lazy. You stop needing motivation at all. You act because that's who you are now. You are the kind of person who finishes what you start, who wakes up when it's hard, who works when it's boring, who keeps moving when there's no applause. And every time you practice that, your mind believes it a little more. Comfort seduces. It tells you that today can slide, that discipline can wait, that you've earned a break. But discomfort tells a different story. It says, there's more inside you. Come find it. And if you listen to that voice more than the one that tells you to take it easy, you begin to grow without limits. You stop looking for motivation and start building momentum, because you've learned that action leads to clarity, not the other way around. You don't wait until you feel like it. You just begin. One step, one cold shower, one meal skipped, one task done with full effort. And that's how mental toughness is formed, not through inspiration, but through repetition. People often ask how to gain more confidence, but confidence is just self-trust. And self-trust is built by doing what's hard, especially when no one's watching. Every time you resist the easy path, you send a message to your mind. I can count on me. That's where real belief is born, not from praise, but from proof. You become less reactive to the world. The ups and downs no longer control you. A bad day doesn't ruin your focus. A delay doesn't break your spirit, because you've already practiced dealing with less than perfect. You've trained your mind to adapt, to hold firm, to stay the course when things get shaky. Discomfort also helps you break attachments to approval, to praise, to the need for things to go a certain way. You start to realize that peace is not found in avoiding pain, but in learning to face it without fear. You stop running from difficulty and start walking straight into it, calmly, steadily, deliberately. This doesn't mean living a harsh or joyless life. It means choosing difficulty on your terms, so life doesn't choose it for you. It means growing stronger in the small things, so the big things don't break you. It means finding joy not in comfort, but in growth. You train in the cold so you can stay warm under pressure. You fast so you learn how little you truly need. You delay gratification, so when you finally receive, you are not ruled by desire. You learn to be still, so noise no longer controls you. Even in relationships, this mindset serves you. You stop needing people to agree with you. You don't chase approval. You don't overreact to criticism. You have trained your emotional endurance. You can sit with discomfort and not make it someone else's problem. That's maturity. That's strength. That's how trust is built, by becoming the person who holds steady when things get shaky. The discomfort also makes success feel different. You don't chase it to feel better about yourself. You chase it to see what you're capable of. The process becomes the reward. And when challenges appear, you don't collapse. You rise. Because this is what you've trained for. Even your thoughts begin to shift. You stop asking, how can I make this easier? And start asking, how can this make me better? You look at hard days as training. You see setbacks as sharpening stones. You understand that every trial is giving you a chance to build something unshakable inside. And what you're building isn't just resilience, it's presence, clarity, peace. Because when you've trained your mind through discomfort, nothing surprises you. You're ready for long days, for pain, for boredom, for uncertainty. Because you've practiced all of it in small doses on purpose. And when the rest of the world falls apart, panics, complains, freezes, you don't. Because you've been here before. You've sat in the cold. You've gone without. You've done hard things. Not once, not sometimes, but daily, quietly, consistently. This is the Stoic path, not the loud one, not the shiny one, but the real one. The one that starts in the early morning when you do what no one sees. The one that shows in how you respond when things go wrong. The one that reveals itself in how calm you are when everyone else loses control. So when someone asks you how to become mentally strong, you'll know the answer. You don't get it from books alone. You get it from action, from choosing the harder path when it's easier not to, from training the body so the mind can follow, from doing something every day that stretches you just a little past your comfort zone. Because that's where real growth lives, not in the comfort, but in the challenge you choose over and over again. And the beautiful thing is, once you begin, you won't want to stop. You'll see that discomfort doesn't break you. It builds you. You'll feel the change, not just in your body, but in your spirit, in your patience, in your grit, in the way you carry yourself when life pushes back. You will start to crave challenge, not fear it, and you'll know deep down that no matter what comes your way, you're ready. Because you've already walked through the fire, and you've come out stronger, quieter, and more focused than ever before. You've faced the cold, the hunger, the stillness. You've learned to delay comfort and embrace the hard path. You've built a kind of strength that doesn't shout. But now, there's another test. One that's quieter, yet just as difficult. It's not about your body. It's not even about your endurance. It's about whether you can truly listen without needing to reply, fix, or prove anything. In a world where everyone wants to speak, few know how to listen. Real listening. Not the kind where you're just waiting for your turn to talk, or thinking of what to say next while someone else is speaking. That's not listening. That's performance. The kind of listening that builds trust, that reveals truth, that creates clarity, starts when you drop your need to be right and start hearing what's really there. When someone speaks to you, they're not just sharing words, they're revealing how they feel, what they value, what scares them. But most of us are too busy forming our opinion or offering advice to notice. When you listen without an agenda, you stop trying to shape the moment, and you let it show you what it really is. This kind of listening slows everything down. It quiets the urge to interrupt, to defend, to explain. It puts your ego on mute and lets your awareness rise. When someone tells you a story, they don't always want a solution. Sometimes they want a mirror, a calm space, a person who isn't trying to fix them, but simply present with them. That's rare. That's powerful. When you master agenda-free listening, people feel safer around you. They stop posturing. They speak more openly because they can sense you're not judging them, not trying to win, not waiting to disagree. You're just there. And being fully present with someone, even in silence, is more healing than most words. This doesn't mean you have no thoughts or opinions. It means you know when to hold them. You recognize that not every conversation is a debate. Not every question needs your wisdom. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is stay silent and let the other person find their own clarity just by being heard. Stoics trained for this. They knew that listening was not a passive act, but an active discipline. It takes energy to keep your attention on someone. It takes humility to resist the urge to interrupt. It takes patience to hear something you disagree with and not immediately correct it. But every time you do this, you sharpen your perception. You start hearing what's not said, the tone, the hesitation, the shift in breath. These small things tell you more than the surface words ever could. And in that space, you become a student of human nature. This skill affects your decisions. When you listen fully, you gather better information. You don't jump to conclusions. You hear the emotion behind the logic, the story behind the facts. This gives you depth. It gives you an edge. You make fewer mistakes because you're not reacting. You're absorbing. And from that, you respond with clarity, not confusion. In leadership, this skill is everything. A leader who listens well builds stronger teams. People speak more freely when they feel heard. Problems are solved faster because the root causes are uncovered. Meetings become more efficient because the speaker knows they won't be cut off. Trust increases, and with trust comes speed, creativity, and alignment. In personal relationships, this kind of listening is a gift. It lowers tension, It dissolves conflict. When someone feels truly heard, they stop needing to shout. They soften. They feel valued. You don't have to fix everything. They just need to know they matter. And when you give someone that gift, the connection deepens. But to listen well, you must quiet your own thoughts. This isn't easy. We all want to be understood. We all want to express ourselves. But when you constantly try to insert your experience into someone else's moment, you dilute it. You turn their story into yours, and slowly they stop sharing. So instead of jumping in, hold back. Let the silence hang. Give the other person time to breathe. They might say more. They might reveal something they didn't even realize was there. And if they don't, that silence still communicates something powerful. You're not in a rush. You're not trying to escape the moment. You're present. When you listen like this, people start to say things like, "I don't know why I'm telling you this," or "No one's ever listened to me like this before." And it's because most people never get to speak without being corrected, redirected, or dismissed. You become the exception. This doesn't mean agreeing with everything. It doesn't mean staying silent forever. It means earning the right to speak by listening first. Once you've heard someone fully, your words carry more weight, because they're rooted in understanding, not assumption. This kind of listening also protects you from being manipulated. When you're calm and quiet, you hear the gaps in someone's logic. You hear when someone's trying to guilt you, or push you, or flatter you for their own gain. You don't need to argue. You just don't take the bait. And by not reacting, you maintain your ground without conflict. You become immune to provocation. People try to stir you up. They try to get a reaction. But you've trained your ears to stay open and your mouth to stay shut until it's time. That's emotional mastery, and it earns quiet respect. This skill is especially important in moments of tension. Most conflicts escalate because both sides stop listening. They interrupt, defend, accuse. But when you're the one who holds the line, who keeps listening even when your ego wants to strike back, you lower the temperature. You become the adult in the room. And often, that's all it takes to end the cycle. The key is to separate the message from the emotion. Someone might speak in anger, but there's truth beneath that heat. If you only hear the tone, you miss the message. But if you listen with patience, you hear the fear behind the anger, the sadness behind the frustration, the need behind the noise. That's where real communication begins. Even in casual conversations, listening changes the tone. You stop dominating the space. You stop planning your reply. You just show up fully and let the moment unfold. And that simplicity makes everything feel more honest. This practice also reduces misunderstanding. Most arguments start not because of what was said, but because of what was not truly heard. Someone assumes, someone guesses, someone fills in the blank with their own story. But when you listen deeply, you hear what was actually said, not what you expected to hear. And that changes everything. Listening without agenda is also good for your own peace. You stop needing to win conversations. You stop craving the last word. You don't feel the pressure to impress. You just absorb, reflect, and choose your response with care. And that calm becomes part of who you are. Even your self-talk improves, because when you learn to listen to others without judgment, you start doing the same for yourself. You catch your inner critic. You question your harsh thoughts. You pause before reacting to your own emotions, and slowly, your mind becomes a kinder place to live. This practice builds something rare, patience in communication. You become the kind of person who doesn't interrupt, who lets others finish, who doesn't rush the moment. And because of that, people open up to you. They trust you. They feel seen by you. And you become more focused, more aware, more calm. Your words gain power because they're no longer thrown out carelessly. They're used with precision, like tools, not weapons. The more you listen, the more you understand the people around you. You see their patterns. You notice what they care about, what they avoid, what they fear, and that gives you insight. It helps you respond wisely, not just quickly. This is how clarity is built. Not through speed, but through space. And that space begins the moment you stop trying to speak and start learning to hear. It's not flashy. It's not easy, but it's worth it, because the ability to listen without an agenda is a rare kind of strength, one that doesn't need to prove itself, one that brings peace into every room, one that sees through noise and connects to the truth beneath it. Keep listening, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because on the other side of that silence, there's growth, there's truth, there's wisdom. And that's where your next level begins. The more you listen, the more you realize how much noise exists, outside and inside. Words spoken too fast, emotions carried on volume, opinions thrown like weapons. You've started to slow down. You've started to hear with clarity. But now comes a new test, one that doesn't ask you to listen more, but to speak less. Not just in volume or frequency, but in quality. There's a kind of speech we use daily without noticing. Words coated in complaint, sentences laced with criticism, little stories centered around self-importance. It doesn't always sound harsh. Sometimes it even sounds normal, casual, funny, honest. But over time, this kind of speech leaves a mark on your relationships, on your peace, on the way you see the world. This challenge is simple on paper. Go 30 days without complaining, bragging, or criticizing. But in practice, it becomes one of the most difficult inner disciplines you can attempt, because it reveals how often you speak not to add value, but to protect ego, release frustration, or fill silence with something familiar. The first thing you'll notice when you try this is awareness. You'll start to catch yourself mid-sentence. You'll feel the tension rise, the urge to vent, to correct, to highlight your achievements. And in that pause, right before the words come out, you'll see the habit. Most people don't know how automatic their speech is until they try to change it. Complaining is the easiest place to begin. It's built into conversations, the weather, traffic, work, prices, people. Most of the time, we don't complain to solve anything. We do it to bond, to connect through mutual dissatisfaction. But what we really create is a mental loop, one where problems grow larger because we keep talking about them. When you stop complaining, even for a day, your mind is forced to find something else to focus on. You begin to look for what's working instead of what's wrong. And slowly, the lens through which you see life starts to shift. You become more solution-oriented. If you can't complain, you start thinking, what can I actually do? Instead of repeating the problem, you start acting. You make calls, you adjust your plan, or you accept that some things are simply outside your control, and that acceptance in itself is freeing. Then comes bragging. This one hides under good intentions. You want to share your wins. You want people to know what you've accomplished. You want to feel seen. But when you remove the need to highlight your own greatness, something surprising happens. You stop performing. You become more relaxed. You let your results speak without pushing them forward in every interaction. You realize how often people talk about themselves, not because they're confident, but because they're afraid of being forgotten. Bragging doesn't build strength, it reveals insecurity. When you stop doing it, you start to feel more solid inside. You don't need approval. You don't need to prove. You're not hiding anything. You're just not pushing it in front of people anymore. That kind of humility draws real respect. It makes your presence more grounded. It makes your words more believable. And it lets others open up without feeling like they need to match your story. The space becomes safer and deeper and far more real. Criticism is the third layer. It wears many masks: helpful advice, concern, truth-telling. But at its root, it's often just frustration looking for a target. When you remove criticism, you're not removing honesty. You're removing the need to speak from judgment. You start focusing on behavior instead of character. You ask better questions. You speak with care. You also learn how often your criticism is really just a mirror. What bothers you in others often reflects something unaddressed in yourself. When you stop criticizing, you gain the chance to look inward, to ask, why does this bother me? What does it reveal about what I value, or fear, or still need to heal? This self-honesty is where real growth begins. You stop pushing your discomfort outward. You hold it, examine it, and over time, transform it. These three habits, complaining, bragging, criticizing, are so deeply rooted that even noticing them takes effort. But the effort pays off quickly. After a few days, your inner world feels quieter, lighter, less tense. You stop rehearsing negativity in your head because it's no longer leaking through your mouth. You stop telling stories where you're always the victim, the hero, or the judge, and you start living more simply. You also begin to notice how others speak. You hear the loops people live in, the friend who always complains, the colleague who always highlights their role, the person who never gives feedback without making someone feel small. Not to judge them, but to see how easy it is to fall into these habits, and how rarely people break them. Your conversations begin to shift. You say less, but mean more. You're more present, more curious. When you remove these automatic patterns, you give space for something deeper, actual connection. You listen not just to reply, but to understand. You speak not to impress, but to express what matters. And this change draws the right people closer. There's another layer to this challenge. What happens inside your mind? Because even if the words don't come out, the thoughts still appear. You'll catch yourself judging silently, wanting to complain, craving the moment to highlight your success, and in those moments, you get a clearer look at how noisy your inner world can be. But instead of suppressing it, you train awareness. You watch the thought arise. You let it pass. And little by little, you weaken the grip these habits have on you. You don't have to fight them. You just don't feed them. And that shift in energy gives you more control. The point isn't to be silent forever. It's to raise the quality of your speech, so that when you speak, it's not from ego or habit or frustration, but from truth, from peace, from clarity. Your words become cleaner, more thoughtful, more useful. Even your self-talk improves. You stop complaining about yourself. You stop criticizing your own process. You don't puff yourself up after small wins. You stay centered, steady, honest. And when your relationship with yourself changes, everything else follows. You stop needing to prove you're right. You stop needing to defend your choices. You don't panic if someone misunderstands you. You trust that truth stands on its own. You don't need to cover it in noise. This challenge also teaches emotional control. You feel the emotion rise. You want to vent, to react, to be heard. But instead, you pause. You hold the line. You stay in your body. And that space builds resilience. It's not about silence for its own sake. It's about learning when your words are serving something and when they're just feeding a fire. This is how discipline grows, through daily practice, through catching the small slips, through being honest with yourself when you fall back into old patterns. You don't shame yourself, you just start again. Each time, a little sharper, a little cleaner. You'll also find moments when silence says more than words ever could. When you could complain, but don't. When you could criticize, but choose to walk away. When you could brag, but instead stay quiet. And the people around you will notice. They might not say it, but they'll feel the difference. You'll become the one who doesn't need to dominate a room, the one who doesn't seek validation, the one who doesn't need to tear others down to feel strong. That presence is rare. It brings peace where others bring tension. It brings calm where others bring noise. And it's built, not in big moments, but in daily choices. The challenge may last 30 days, but what it gives you can last a lifetime. You start to speak with more purpose. You begin to think before you talk. You ask, does this help? Does this heal? Does this matter? And if it doesn't, you let it go. Your voice becomes a tool, not a weapon. Your silence becomes a shield, not a punishment. You begin to walk through life lighter, not because everything is easy, but because your words no longer weigh you down. And over time, you find yourself surrounded by people who match that energy, who speak with care, who listen with presence, who lift rather than drain. Because your speech no longer invites gossip or drama or empty praise. It invites growth, it invites honesty, it invites depth. This is what speech detox is truly about. Not perfection, not silence for show, but a return to clarity. A return to the truth beneath the noise. A return to the self that doesn't need to perform, compare, or control. It's one of the hardest challenges you'll ever take on, and one of the most rewarding. Because once your words are clean, your mind begins to follow. And when both are aligned, you walk through life with a power that doesn't shout, doesn't seek attention, and doesn't need approval. It simply is, calm, clear, unshakable. The moment you stop needing your words to win approval, a quiet shift takes place. You no longer speak to be liked. You no longer explain yourself to be understood. You begin to live from a deeper place, a space where peace doesn't come from applause and identity doesn't come from how people react to you. Once you've trained your mouth to be quiet and your mind to be still, the next challenge appears, finding out who you really are when no one is watching. Most people live their entire lives needing to be seen, heard, praised. They chase attention without realizing it. A compliment makes them feel valuable. A rejection makes them question themselves. Their sense of worth rises and falls depending on who is paying attention. But there is another way. A way of walking through life with invisible dignity, a way of building inner strength so stable it doesn't move when the world does. This is not about being cold. It's not about isolating yourself. It's about building such a strong connection to your values that outside noise no longer shapes your self-image. You know what you stand for. You know what matters to you. So whether people cheer or criticize, it doesn't change your direction. That kind of self-respect cannot be bought. It's not gifted. It's built through silence, through struggle, through choosing truth over comfort. You learn to detach from outcomes and instead focus on effort, not because results don't matter, but because your character is not built by results. It's built by how you move when no one's clapping. When you stop looking outward for approval, you start turning inward for alignment. You ask better questions. Did I act with integrity? Did I do what I said I would do? Did I treat others with respect, even when it was hard? These are the questions that grow dignity. Quiet questions, private questions. But the answers shape the kind of person you become. Many people confuse confidence with attention, but real confidence often looks like humility. It shows up in small decisions, keeping promises to yourself, speaking the truth when it's uncomfortable, saying no when pressure says yes. It shows up in how you carry yourself, not how loud you are. This way of living removes the need to perform. You stop pretending to be more than you are. You stop trying to control how people see you. You stop bending your values to fit in. And what you gain is freedom. You're no longer stuck in a loop of chasing praise or avoiding judgment. You move according to what's right, not what's popular. This kind of strength is invisible to most. It doesn't get likes. It doesn't get recognition. But it builds a peace inside you that doesn't shake. And from that peace, you make better choices. Not choices to impress, but choices that align with your core. You also stop wasting energy trying to prove yourself. You let your actions speak. You stay committed to your path, even when no one notices. And the irony is, over time, people start noticing. Not because you're trying to be impressive, but because quiet consistency speaks louder than noise ever could. This mindset helps you face criticism without collapse. When you're deeply connected to your values, you can hear feedback without taking it personally. You can learn from it without letting it define you. And if the criticism is unfair, you don't need to fight it. You know who you are, and no one's opinion can take that away from you. It also protects you from praise that distorts. Compliments feel good, but they can trap you if you start depending on them. You start doing things not because they're right, but because they'll get a good reaction. Slowly, you lose yourself trying to stay liked. But when your sense of worth is internal, praise doesn't change your path. You appreciate it, but you don't depend on it. This is how you become untouchable, not in an arrogant way, in a quiet, steady, grounded way. You're not thrown off course by someone else's mood. You don't chase validation. You don't beg for attention. You know what you bring to the table, even if no one else sees it yet. You stop needing to be included in every conversation. You don't fear being overlooked, because you're no longer driven by status. You're driven by substance. You're building something real, not just something visible. This changes how you relate to others. You stop comparing yourself. You don't feel smaller when someone else shines. Their success doesn't make you feel behind. Their praise doesn't make you feel threatened. You celebrate them because your identity isn't built on being better than others. It's built on being real with yourself. You also stop over-explaining. You don't rush to defend your decisions. You don't panic when someone misunderstands you. If they ask, you explain. If they judge, you stay calm, because your dignity isn't up for debate. You don't owe everyone an explanation for your choices, and in the rare cases when someone really tries to tear you down, you stay grounded. You don't match their energy. You don't fight their noise with your own. You stay aligned. You respond only if needed, and only with clarity. Not to win, but to stay centered. This inner grounding is a shield. It protects you from insecurity, jealousy, emotional reactivity. It gives you space to think clearly, even when emotions are high. You don't act out of panic. You don't react out of fear. You respond with intention or not at all. This mindset also frees your creativity. You stop worrying about how your work will be received. You stop filtering your ideas through the lens of, will they like it? You create what feels true, what feels needed, what feels aligned with your mission. And from that place, your work becomes more powerful because it's honest. This honesty also improves your relationships. People feel safer with you because you're not playing a game. You're not trying to impress. You're not adjusting yourself for approval. You're simply being. That kind of presence builds deep trust. It allows others to be themselves around you. You become the kind of person people respect, not because you chase respect, but because you live in a way that commands it, quietly, consistently, without needing a spotlight. But this doesn't happen by accident. It takes daily work. You reflect, you reset, you check your motives. You ask, am I doing this for truth or for praise? Am I being honest or just trying to be liked? And when the answer points to ego, you adjust, not with shame, with awareness. Over time, this practice builds an unshakable core. You become less needy, less reactive, less thrown by life's highs and lows. You stop depending on others to tell you who you are, because you already know. That's invisible dignity. It's the strength no one claps for, the power no one sees, the kind of confidence that doesn't require an audience. It's what allows you to walk away from what's wrong, even when it's easy. To say no to what's tempting, even when it's praised. To stand alone in truth, even when no one agrees. It's not loud, it's not celebrated, but it's rare, and it's real, and it's yours, if you choose it. Every day, every moment, every time you pick integrity over image, depth over appearance, stillness over performance. You don't need to post it. You don't need to say it out loud. Let the way you live speak for you. Let your actions show what you value. Let your silence reveal your strength. Because dignity isn't something the world can give you. It's something you build through truth, through discipline, through choosing who you are, even when no one's watching. And once it's yours, no one can take it. Not praise, not rejection, not failure, not success. You carry it quietly, and that quiet changes everything. When you stop needing attention to feel valuable, you uncover a different kind of control. The kind that isn't visible to others, but quietly changes your life from within. Dignity teaches you how to carry yourself. But now comes the moment where that dignity is tested. The instant someone crosses the line, the split second a situation spins out of control, or the sharp edge of a word cuts deeper than expected. That's the moment. That's where your entire internal training either holds or shatters. This is where emotional timing steps in. The power to pause, to observe, to choose, not react. Most people live their lives in reaction mode. Something happens and they respond automatically. A rude comment and they lash back. A challenge and they panic. A disagreement and they raise their voice. No space, no awareness, just pure instinct taking over. And while instinct is fast, it's not always wise. The Stoics understood this. They trained for it. Because in every moment of emotional pressure, there's a sliver of time, a small space between what happens to you and what you do about it. And if you can stretch that space, even by a second, you take control. Control doesn't mean shutting down your emotions. It means seeing them without being ruled by them. You feel the anger rise, but you don't speak yet. You feel the fear kick in, but you stay still. You feel the urge to react, but you watch it first. This pause is not weakness, it's strength. Most people think speaking quickly makes them strong, but true strength is in restraint. In that pause, you collect your thoughts. You ground your body. You ask better questions. What's really happening here? What's worth saying? What part of this is emotion, and what part is truth? That level of self-control changes everything. You stop creating damage with your words. You stop escalating problems that could have been solved with silence. You stop saying things you can't take back. The more you practice this, the more awareness you build. You start recognizing your own patterns. Maybe you get defensive when questioned. Maybe you shut down when challenged. Maybe your tone changes when you feel ignored. But instead of letting those reactions run you, you catch them. Observation becomes your greatest tool, not just of others, but of yourself. You start tracking how your emotions move, what triggers them, and how long they last. You learn that most reactions pass if you don't feed them. That initial wave of anger, it fades. That sharp feeling of insult, it dissolves. But only if you hold your ground and don't let it take over. This doesn't mean you ignore emotions. You acknowledge them without becoming them. You say to yourself, I'm angry, but I don't need to act on it right now. I'm stressed, but I don't need to pass that stress on to others. I'm hurt, but I can respond from clarity, not pain. That pause creates space for better decisions. You stop reacting based on ego. You start responding from alignment. You ask, what's the wise thing to do here? What would I regret later? What's actually needed? You stop letting others control your emotional state. Just because someone else is loud doesn't mean you need to match them. Just because someone is careless doesn't mean you need to lose your center. That pause becomes your protection. You let their emotion move through the air, and you stand in your own. This doesn't just help you, it helps everyone around you. When you pause, you become a stabilizer. You de-escalate without needing control. You bring down the heat just by staying calm. And in doing so, you shift the dynamic. The other person starts matching your energy instead of the other way around. Emotional timing also allows you to break cycles. Most conflict is a loop. Someone says something triggering, the other reacts, and the pattern repeats. But when you pause, you interrupt that pattern. You introduce something new: stillness, reflection, curiosity. That shift often changes the whole outcome. In relationships, this skill is gold. You don't fight to win. You don't punish with silence. You speak with care, and only when ready. You let your nervous system settle before you respond. You express without blame. You protect the connection even when emotions run high. This kind of mastery doesn't come from reading. It comes from practice, real time. You'll get it wrong. You'll react too fast. You'll speak when you shouldn't have. But if you reflect, learn, and try again, the space grows. That moment between stimulus and response becomes easier to access. And over time, it becomes your default. You also stop relying on your first emotional judgment. You give situations a chance to unfold. You learn that what feels urgent is often not important. That what triggers you now may mean nothing tomorrow. That time is often the best mirror for truth. This shift makes you harder to manipulate, because you don't respond impulsively. You don't act on surface emotion. You wait. You think. You respond when the moment is clear, not when your body is overwhelmed. It also protects your reputation. One emotional outburst can undo years of calm effort. But when people see you stay composed under stress, they trust you more. They come to you when things get rough. They rely on your steadiness. This skill even helps with decision-making. You don't rush into yes. You don't react to pressure. You pause. You let the emotion pass, and then you see the situation more clearly. You make choices that align with your long-term values, not your short-term feelings. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. That gap between trigger and reaction becomes your home. You live there. You breathe there. And from there, you create your life with intention, not chaos. You begin to see emotion as information, not instruction. Anger may be a signal, but it doesn't need to drive your response. Fear may alert you, but it doesn't need to guide your choices. Every emotion becomes a visitor, not a ruler. You also develop patience, not just with others, but with yourself. When you mess up, you don't spiral. You pause. You reflect. You reset. You understand that growth is not perfection. It's awareness followed by action. This builds confidence, not the loud kind, the grounded kind. You don't fear being tested because you trust your ability to respond with clarity. You don't avoid challenge because you know you can meet it without losing control. And when life throws something unexpected, you no longer collapse. You observe, you breathe, you make space, then you act. Not because you're emotionless, but because you're rooted. This is the art of stoic reaction, not suppression, not indifference, but conscious choice. When you live this way, peace follows. Not because life is easier, but because you're no longer at war with it. You meet it with presence, not panic, with calm, not chaos, with wisdom, not impulse. That's emotional timing, the quiet power to pause when others rush, to stay grounded when things shake, to wait until clarity returns, then respond with precision. No one can give you that skill. It's earned breath by breath, but once it's yours, it changes everything. And the best part? You don't need anyone else to practice. Every situation, every emotion, every challenge becomes your training ground. So keep watching, keep pausing, keep choosing, and let each quiet response shape the life you're building, one moment at a time. The moment you begin to respond instead of react, you also begin to see how powerful each word truly is. It becomes clear that language is not just sound, it's force. What you say, how you say it, and when you say it, leaves a mark, either lifting the moment or cutting it apart. All the control you built in silence, in pause, in restraint, it's now tested in the words you choose. Because once they're out, you don't own them anymore. They build or they break. They create peace or they cause harm. And every word carries weight. Most people speak as if words disappear. They treat language like air, passing, light, forgettable. But words don't vanish. They stay in people's minds, shaping how they think, how they see themselves, and how they act. One careless sentence can change someone's confidence for years. One harsh comment thrown in anger can turn into a wound that echoes long after it's said. What makes this even more dangerous is how easy it is to speak without thinking. The brain moves faster than awareness. You feel something, and your mouth starts moving before your mind catches up. And in that gap, real damage can happen. You don't just hurt someone else, you also shape how you see the world. Words are repeated. Repetition becomes belief. Belief becomes identity. And just like that, what started as casual language becomes the structure you live inside. People underestimate this. They joke about things they actually fear. They insult what they secretly admire. They talk down on others to feel stronger. Every one of these habits reinforces a mindset. Over time, language becomes self-programming. Say enough negative things about others, and you start to see the world as full of enemies. Say enough negative things about yourself, and you start living like someone who doesn't deserve much. This is not just about being nice, it's about being accurate. When you speak with no awareness, your words become cheap. But when you speak with care, every word becomes valuable. That value builds trust. It builds respect. It builds reality that reflects thoughtfulness instead of impulse. Think about how often people talk about problems without offering solutions. They repeat complaints, describe worst-case scenarios, and use dramatic language that inflames fear and helplessness. This kind of language spreads anxiety. It adds weight where clarity is needed. When you speak like this, you reinforce helplessness. You magnify what's wrong and block out what's possible. Now, consider the opposite. When someone speaks with calm precision, not ignoring problems but naming them clearly and offering a grounded path forward, the entire tone shifts. People stop panicking. They start thinking. They see choices again. That kind of language is leadership, not just because it sounds confident, but because it gives shape to direction. Words also influence emotion. When you say something is disastrous, you feel different than if you say it's difficult but manageable. When you say always or never, you trap yourself in extreme thinking. But when you use words like sometimes or in this moment, you give space for growth. The language you use to describe a situation becomes the lens through which you experience it. And that experience becomes your emotional reality. In relationships, language either builds connection or creates distance. Words of blame build walls. Words of understanding build bridges. If your language constantly points out flaws, assumes intentions, or uses sarcasm as a shield, connection weakens. But if your words reflect honesty, curiosity, and care, even hard conversations lead to closeness. Most breakdowns between people are not about facts, they're about tone. The wrong truth said the wrong way feels like an attack. The same truth said with gentleness feels like a gift. So it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. When you remove sharpness, remove ego, and bring respect into your voice, even hard words can be received well. You also begin to see how language affects action. The way you describe your goals, your plans, even your identity, changes how likely you are to succeed. If you say, "I'm trying," your brain hears doubt. If you say, "I'm doing," it hears commitment. If you say, "I can't," you stop looking for a way. If you say, "I'm learning," you stay open. Words frame what's possible, and you begin to live within the frame you build. Intentional language is also economical. You stop using 10 words when 5 will do. You stop repeating the same point 3 times because you think volume equals clarity. You speak once clearly and let the silence do the rest. That kind of speech has weight because it respects attention. It doesn't waste space. It lands. Even the words you speak to yourself change when you realize their weight. The inner dialogue shifts from judgment to instruction. Instead of saying, "I always mess this up," you say, "I didn't get this right yet." Instead of saying, "I'm not good at this," you say, "I'm practicing." Those small changes seem subtle, but they shape how you handle struggle. They turn moments of failure into steps, not setbacks. When your inner voice becomes clearer, kinder, and more disciplined, your outer voice follows. You stop gossiping. You stop talking just to talk. You stop using words to fill space or feel important. You speak when it adds something, and when you do, people notice the difference. This discipline doesn't limit you. It sharpens you. You become more persuasive, more trustworthy, more grounded. Your voice holds power not because it's loud, but because it's clean. People trust what comes from you because they don't feel manipulated. They feel respected. Careless words often come from carelessness with attention. If you're not listening fully, your words are likely to miss. But when you're fully present, you catch what others miss. You respond to the real issue, not just the surface. And when you speak, it's from connection, not assumption. You also learn to speak less when less is better. Some situations don't need a reply. Some conversations are better ended with a single sentence. Some arguments lose power when you don't add energy to them. The weight of your words increases when they're used with purpose. Language can also be a tool for healing. Words of recognition, apology, or encouragement can shift someone's entire day. The right words at the right moment can undo years of silence, but only if they're honest, only if they come without agenda. That's what gives them weight. And that weight isn't always heavy. Sometimes it's light, so light that it lifts others. But even that lightness is earned. You have to learn when to speak softly and when to be direct. You have to know when silence holds more power than explanation. The Stoics didn't see speech as entertainment. They saw it as action. Every word should serve a purpose, reflect a principle, or help something grow. If it didn't, it was better left unsaid. That's the standard. Not perfection, not performance, but purpose. In every conversation you have a choice, to inflate noise or to create meaning. If you choose meaning, you walk differently. You speak less, but say more. You hold your tongue when anger tries to lead. You pick words like a sculptor picks his tools. You know what you're building. Words can destroy trust faster than it's built. One lie, one insult, one careless comment, but they can also rebuild with patience, with effort, with integrity. It's slow, but real things always are. The way forward is not silence forever. It's speaking as if words matter, speaking as if someone's heart is listening, speaking as if you might live inside the world your words create, because you will. Your entire presence is reflected in how you speak. People will forget what you wore, they'll forget what you looked like, but they won't forget how your words made them feel. So make them feel seen, make them feel safe, make them feel truth, not because you're clever, but because you're clear. Speak with weight, speak with care, speak like it matters, because it does, always. Once you begin to speak with intention, you naturally start asking yourself another question. What needs to be said at all? Because as you watch the ripple effect of words, how they land, what they reveal, what they expose, you start to see that not every truth needs a voice right away. Some things gain value through quiet development. And one of the most powerful things you can learn is the strength of keeping your plans to yourself. Sharing your goals feels good. Talking about what you're going to do, what you're building, what you're aiming for. It feeds the ego. It gives a sense of momentum, a taste of recognition before anything real has even begun. But this temporary high comes at a cost. The more you talk about your intentions, the more your brain believes you've already done the work. You borrow satisfaction from a future that doesn't yet exist. When your mind receives praise just for announcing a goal, it loses urgency. You feel rewarded before you've earned anything. The hunger fades, the pressure lifts, and the very energy that should have been fueling execution is spent on conversation. This is how many people end up stuck. They start strong in public and fade in silence. They speak like giants, but move like shadows. Silence protects your process. When you don't talk about your plans, you're left with only two choices: execute or abandon. There's no praise for thinking, no reward for intention, just action, just results. That tension, that quiet responsibility, is what builds discipline. It keeps you honest with yourself. You can't hide behind the applause of others because there's no applause yet, only work. There's also a deeper kind of focus that comes when you move in silence. When you're not distracted by people's reactions, positive or negative, you're free to focus on the work itself. You don't second-guess your ideas based on someone else's opinion. You don't shift direction to impress. You stay in your lane, steady and clear, building without noise. This isn't about secrecy, it's about self-respect. Not everything needs to be announced. Not every move requires validation. You know why you're doing it. That's enough. And when the result comes, it speaks for itself. People see it. They feel it. And by then, there's nothing to explain. Keeping your plans private also protects your energy. Sharing too early invites distractions. People will offer opinions, advice, doubts. Some of them mean well, some don't. But either way, their input pulls your focus outward. You start thinking about how your plan sounds instead of how it works. You start preparing to defend your decision instead of refining your execution. This splits your mental energy, and when energy is split, results weaken. There's also envy. Not everyone wants to see you grow. Some people prefer the version of you that stays still. When you share your ambitions, you trigger their insecurities. You remind them of what they're not doing. And even if they smile, they may quietly hope you fall short. Moving in silence protects you from this hidden resistance. It keeps your momentum away from opinions that could distort it. By working quietly, you also develop trust in yourself. You stop needing someone to say, "You're on the right track." You become your own compass. That kind of self-reliance is rare. Most people are always seeking signs, feedback, signals. But when you let your actions be the proof, you don't need confirmation. You just keep building. It also forces clarity. When you can't impress anyone with talk, you're left with one question: is this worth doing? Not, does this sound good? Or, will people like this? But, is this aligned with what I value? If the answer is yes, you keep going. If it's no, you stop. No audience, no performance, just alignment and action. This way of moving gives you space to evolve. When your plans are private, you're free to adjust, to pivot, to change your mind. You're not trapped by your own words. You don't feel stuck proving a version of yourself that no longer fits. You're allowed to grow quietly, without explanation. It also builds presence. When you're not broadcasting your goals, you're not projecting into the future. You're grounded in what you're doing right now. And that presence deepens your work. It sharpens your senses. It puts your full attention where it belongs, in the task, not in the idea of what it might become. Working in silence also sets a powerful standard. It tells people that you're not interested in praise for potential. You only speak when there's something real to show. And that makes your voice more powerful when you finally do speak. Because by then, it's backed by results, not theory. You begin to notice how noisy the world is. Everyone talking, everyone posting, everyone announcing their next move. But you also begin to notice how little of that noise turns into something lasting. Many speak of change, few build it. Many claim discipline, few live it. And the difference isn't talent, it's consistency. And consistency thrives in silence. There's a quiet strength in not explaining yourself, in simply showing up, doing the work, and letting time speak for you. No need to argue, no need to justify. You just keep going, and in time, those who doubted will understand, those who questioned will see, those who underestimated will adjust. You also free yourself from premature judgment. When you speak too early, people form opinions too soon. They box you in, they set expectations, and suddenly you're not building what feels right. You're building what fits their view. Silence removes that pressure. It gives you freedom to build something pure before the world gets a say. Even in close relationships, discretion has value. You don't need to share every detail of your journey. Sometimes, the most supportive thing others can do is trust your silence. Because silence doesn't mean hiding, it means holding. It means protecting something still growing. A seed doesn't shout before it sprouts. It just roots deeper, quietly, until it's ready. There's also humility in silence. You're not assuming the outcome. You're not asking for credit. You're just doing the work. And that humility becomes power. Because when the results come, you're ready. You're not surprised. You're not unsteady. You've earned it in private. And now it shows. This mindset shifts how you move through setbacks. When no one knows your plan, failure becomes feedback, not public shame. You adjust. You learn. You try again, without the pressure of an audience, without the fear of losing face. That privacy gives you room to improve. You stop performing and start progressing. You stop planning for approval and start aligning with purpose. You stop asking, will they like this? And start asking, is this true to me? And that shift brings peace. Because now your direction isn't driven by attention, it's driven by clarity. This kind of clarity is contagious. Others feel it. They may not know what you're doing, but they sense something. They respect the quiet confidence, the steady focus, the discipline that doesn't ask to be seen. And when the results come, they're undeniable. Not because they're loud, but because they're real. They carry the weight of work done in silence, the depth of something built without noise, the proof of a path walked alone, step by step, without needing to explain it. This is the wisdom of not telling people your plans. It's not about secrecy, it's about strength. It's about letting go of the need to be seen and choosing instead to become. Because when the world is busy watching, you stay busy building. And when the time is right, the work speaks louder than any announcement ever could. Holding your plans in silence gives you a powerful kind of freedom. But what happens after the plan begins? That's when many fall into a quiet trap. They've said nothing for so long that once they start, they overcompensate. They begin explaining every move, every choice, every delay, not for clarity, but for reassurance. And without knowing it, they trade respect for comfort. This is where invisible self-sabotage begins. Over-explaining seems harmless. It feels like being open, like being responsible, like staying transparent. But under the surface, it often reveals something deeper: doubt. The more you try to make others understand you, the more power you lose. Not because explanation is wrong, but because the need to explain too much often comes from fear. Fear of being judged, fear of not being trusted, fear of being misunderstood. Every time you offer an unnecessary explanation, you send a message. I'm not sure this speaks for itself. And people can feel it. They may not say it out loud, but they start to sense a lack of certainty. Your confidence becomes diluted. Your decisions begin to feel conditional, as if you're waiting for permission. That energy spreads, and what was once grounded begins to shake. When you constantly explain yourself, you invite more questions than answers. The more details you give, the more room others have to pick things apart. You think you're clarifying, but you're creating openings, places where people can doubt, correct, or push back. And not everyone pushes with good intentions. There's a fine line between communicating clearly and oversharing. Clarity says what needs to be said. Oversharing fills the silence with insecurity. You repeat points. You go back over your reasoning. You justify things that don't need justification. And slowly, you begin to sound like you're convincing yourself more than anyone else. This creates a loop. The more you explain, the more you feel exposed. The more exposed you feel, the more you try to control the reaction. So you keep explaining, hoping to cover every angle. But real respect doesn't come from being fully understood. It comes from being fully centered. The people who hold attention the longest are not the ones who explain everything. They are the ones who know how to say just enough and stop. They speak with economy. They trust that their actions, their tone, and their presence say what words cannot. That trust in their own silence is what makes others listen more closely when they do speak. Mystery is not manipulation, it's discipline. It's the willingness to let others wonder, to let your work unfold without commentary, to be okay with not being perfectly interpreted. When you don't fill in every blank, you give people a reason to lean in, to observe more, to pay closer attention. And that attention, when earned in silence, carries far more weight than forced understanding ever will. There is also strength in letting misunderstanding pass without correction. Not every false assumption needs to be fixed. Not every missed point needs to be repeated. When you learn to let others be wrong about you without losing your ground, you reclaim energy. You stop chasing perfect perception. You begin walking in your own frame, not the one they build for you. Over-explaining also shows up in small habits. When you write, do you over-clarify every line? When you speak, do you repeat your reasoning even when no one asked? When you make a decision, do you immediately try to soften it by listing every reason why? These are all signs of a deeper pattern, the belief that your choices won't be accepted unless they are dressed in long explanations. But the truth is, decisions made with integrity don't need defense. They can be communicated clearly, directly, and then left alone. The more you practice this, the more people respect your word. Not because it's loud, but because it stands firm. When you stop trying to make everyone understand you, the right people begin to trust you more. Over-explaining can also become a way to hide. You layer words to protect yourself from feedback. You talk so much that no one gets the chance to question you. You bury the truth in excessive detail. But protection is not the same as power. Power doesn't need padding. It stands clean, honest, direct. Reclaiming mystery starts with trusting your value before anyone confirms it. You don't need to explain your process if your results speak. You don't need to defend your boundaries if they're clear. You don't need to justify your path if it's true to your core. People may ask. People may not understand. That's okay. Their comfort is not your job. You also stop apologizing for doing what's necessary. You stop softening your strength so others don't feel uncomfortable. You speak when needed, and you do it with calm finality, not aggression, not arrogance, just clarity that doesn't wobble. This doesn't mean you withhold important information. It means you don't add unnecessary explanations just to feel safer. It means you trust your presence, your integrity, and your experience to carry the meaning, even when your words are minimal. In leadership, over-explaining can destroy authority. Teams don't need their leaders to narrate every choice. They need direction. They need stability. When a leader explains too much, people start looking for flaws. They stop focusing on the goal and start analyzing the delivery. Precision keeps the mission in focus. Excessive dialogue clouds it. In relationships, this habit often turns conversations into lectures. The more you explain, the more it sounds like you're trying to win or control. But people don't connect with perfection. They connect with confidence wrapped in stillness. A simple "I understand" can be more powerful than a detailed defense. A quiet decision held with care can create more peace than hours of explaining. This practice also helps you face your own doubts. When you stop explaining everything to others, you're left with your own reasons, and those reasons need to be strong enough to stand on their own. That's where growth happens. You refine your why. You sharpen your vision. You choose actions that don't require constant backup. You also begin to notice how often other people over-explain, and you learn to listen differently. You hear where the fear is hiding. You hear what they're really asking for under all the words. And in those moments, you're reminded of why clarity matters, why simplicity creates trust, why restraint reveals strength. This shift isn't about being distant. It's about being rooted. You stop rushing to fill the silence. You stop trying to manage people's reactions. You let things land. You let people think. You trust that truth doesn't need to be shouted. It can be felt. You gain time. You gain energy. You gain clarity. All because you stop spending yourself on unnecessary explanations. You say what matters and nothing more. And in doing so, your words become sharper. Your presence becomes fuller. Your value becomes clearer. This is how you stop sabotaging yourself. Not by doing more, but by saying less, by letting your choices stand, by trusting your path enough to walk it without constant narration. You are not here to be endlessly understood. You are here to live truthfully, to move with purpose, to speak with clarity. And sometimes, the most powerful statement you can make is silence, backed by action, shaped by conviction, held with peace. Letting go of the need to explain everything unlocks a different kind of discipline. But silence alone isn't enough. To build real influence, you must know not just what to say, but when to say it. There's a deeper layer of strategy where timing becomes everything. The quietest person in the room is not always the weakest. In fact, they often hold the most power, not because they talk often, but because they know exactly when to speak. This is the skill of tactical withholding. Holding your voice isn't the same as hiding your voice. One is fear, the other is control. Tactical withholding is not about staying silent forever. It's about waiting long enough to see the full picture before you act. It's about stepping back, letting others reveal their thoughts, their mistakes, their motivations, and then speaking with clarity after the dust has settled. People who rush to speak often speak without knowing. They react, they guess, they want to be first. They confuse speed with sharpness, but in that rush, they miss something important. They give away their position before they understand the landscape. They lose their advantage before they've even begun. The Stoics understood this. They believed that power is not in always speaking, but in knowing when your words will matter most. When you hold back long enough, you watch how others behave under pressure. You see who speaks just to fill the space. You notice who needs to prove something. You learn who is thoughtful and who is impulsive. And that information becomes your edge. By speaking last, you give yourself the benefit of hearing everyone else's point of view. You collect the data, you hear the arguments, you observe the tone, the emotion, the hesitation. And then, when you do speak, you're not guessing. You're responding from full awareness. That kind of response lands differently. It carries weight. It moves the conversation forward instead of adding to the noise. This also builds authority. In any group setting, the person who waits to speak sends a message without saying a word. They don't need to dominate. They don't crave attention. They are listening, observing, preparing. When they finally speak, people listen because they've been waiting. And when words are rare, they feel more valuable. There is power in letting others talk first. They expose their plans. They reveal their fears. They set the frame. And by the time you enter the conversation, you already know where to aim. You can speak with precision because you're not reacting, you're responding with strategy. This approach also protects you from emotional missteps. The longer you wait, the more you regulate your response. You're not pulled into drama. You don't say things you'll later regret. You let others use their energy while you conserve yours. That patience isn't weakness, it's strength under control. You also give yourself time to think. In meetings, in negotiations, in any situation where decisions carry weight, speaking too soon means you're basing your voice on partial information. But when you hold back, you give yourself a chance to process, to refine, to consider angles others missed. This reflection improves your accuracy. You don't just contribute, you elevate the conversation. This discipline is especially useful in leadership. Leaders who speak last show that they trust their team to share first. It signals respect. It tells people that their thoughts matter. It encourages openness. And when the leader finally shares their view, it's not just a command. It's a conclusion formed from collective input. Delaying your voice also helps in conflict. In tense situations, people expect quick reactions. But when you pause, when you let others speak, vent, even attack, you stay grounded. You don't match their chaos. You let their emotion run its course. And then, when the room is quiet, you step in, not to defend, but to redirect. That calm response often shifts the entire tone. This isn't about silence for the sake of silence. It's about timing. And the more you study the moment, the more you feel when it's right. You don't always speak last just to be last. You speak last when it matters most. When your words can shape direction, settle confusion, or close a loop. There's also humility in this approach. You're not obsessed with being the smartest voice in the room. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're focused on the result, not the reaction. And that kind of mindset is rare. It creates trust. People sense that you speak because you have something meaningful to say, not because you want attention. When people know you won't speak unless necessary, your words become a signal. When you open your mouth, it means the moment calls for it, and that consistency builds a reputation. Over time, people seek your input, not because you're loud, but because your silence means you're paying attention. This practice also helps manage pressure. You stop feeling like you need to respond immediately. You let others fill the space. You hold your ground. And in that stillness, you begin to notice how much time you truly have. Most situations feel urgent only because people rush. But when you pause, you see the layers. You find the gap. You insert your voice at the right time, not the fastest time. In group discussions, this skill shifts how people relate to you. They look to you not just for ideas, but for perspective. They trust that you've been listening, that your voice is grounded, not reactionary, that you're adding clarity, not noise. It also keeps you from being predictable. If you speak first in every setting, people know your position before you even open your mouth. But when you wait, you stay unreadable. You hold your cards. That unpredictability is a form of leverage. You reveal only what you choose, and that control keeps you in a stronger position. Even in everyday conversation, this shift matters. You start responding to what was actually said, not what you expected. You stop interrupting. You stop forming replies while others are still talking. You hear more. You speak less. But when you do, your words land harder. You also grow more confident in your ability to stay silent when necessary. Not every moment needs your opinion. Not every disagreement needs your correction. Some things resolve themselves if you let them unfold. And when you practice patience long enough, you see that silence often delivers answers better than arguments. This habit takes time. At first, the urge to jump in will be strong. You'll feel the tension. You'll want to correct, to contribute, to clarify. But if you resist, if you breathe, if you wait, something shifts. You begin to trust the pause. You begin to feel the power in restraint. You realize that the less you rush, the more you influence. Tactical withholding isn't about being passive. It's about choosing your moment, not just to speak, but to speak from the deepest level of awareness. And that awareness builds with every moment you hold back, every second you listen, every time you choose stillness over speed. You're not avoiding the conversation, you're guiding it, not from the front, but from the core. You're letting others burn out their assumptions, their emotion, their noise. And when the time is right, you enter, not to compete, but to clarify, not to impress, but to conclude. This is where real power comes from, not from dominating the air, but from shaping it with purpose. And when you build that kind of presence, your voice doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be timed, deliberate, clean. And when it finally comes, it speaks louder than everything that came before it. Because some of the strongest voices are not heard often. They're heard exactly when it matters most. Knowing when to speak last teaches discipline. It teaches you to observe, to wait, and to understand the value of timing. But even deeper than timing is containment, the ability to feel strongly and not always show it. There is a silent power in emotional control. And in a world that often encourages instant expression, immediate reaction, and full emotional exposure, the ability to hold your ground in stillness becomes rare and incredibly effective. There's a belief that expressing every feeling is always healthy, that if you feel something, it must be said, shared, or explained. But this isn't always true. Not every emotion needs to be processed out loud. Not every internal wave needs to become external noise. Constant emotional expression can become a trap. one where you start to believe your emotions are always right, always valid to act on, and always deserve an audience. Some emotions pass if you let them. But when you express them too quickly, you give them more life than they deserve. A thought that could have faded in silence becomes a conversation, a conflict, or a misunderstanding, not because it was important, but because it was given volume. Expression is not always clarity. Sometimes it is just a distraction dressed as truth. When you practice stillness, you create space between feeling and action. You let emotions move through you instead of out of you. You notice them, but you don't bow to them. You can feel sadness without collapsing. You can feel anger without attacking. You can feel disappointment without projecting it onto someone else. That kind of stillness doesn't make you cold. It makes you wise. Expression should be chosen, not automatic. You don't lose anything by not sharing every emotional thought that passes through you. In fact, you gain composure. You gain space to reflect. You gain the ability to choose your words carefully or to not speak at all. And from that space, better outcomes grow. This doesn't mean shutting down or pretending to be unaffected. It means choosing to carry your emotions quietly while they form into something useful. A lesson, a decision, a new understanding. But if you speak too early, before the emotion has settled, you risk speaking from a place of confusion. You create reactions instead of resolution. Stillness is also protection. When you hold your emotional world with care, you stop giving others a weapon they can use against you. You're not hiding, you're preserving. You're not distant, you're discerning. Not everyone deserves access to your raw emotions. Not everyone is capable of holding them well. So you choose when to share, and with whom. That boundary keeps your peace intact. Holding your emotions doesn't make you less human. It makes you more responsible. Because emotional honesty isn't just about what you feel, it's about when and how you share it. If you express too soon, you risk confusing venting with truth. But if you wait, if you process, if you slow down, your expression becomes cleaner, sharper, more healing than harming. This applies deeply in conflict. In the heat of the moment, expressing everything you feel can do more damage than good. You may feel better temporarily, but the words can linger. The tone can cut. The look on your face can stay in someone's mind longer than you thought. By holding your emotion, you're not avoiding the moment, you're shaping it. You're saying, I care more about the outcome than the release. Stillness also brings perspective. What feels urgent in the moment may feel small an hour later. What felt like betrayal may simply be misunderstanding. And without immediate expression, you give truth a chance to surface. You let emotion cool so that wisdom can step in. This discipline doesn't require suppression. You don't push emotions away. You feel them fully. You sit with them. You observe how they rise, where they land in your body, what thoughts they trigger. But you hold your ground. You don't rush to translate them into words. You don't act until you understand. Over time, this practice builds internal stability. You're not tossed around by feelings. You stop fearing your emotional waves because you know how to ride them without letting them crash everything around you. You become your own anchor, not by force, but by presence. Selective expression is not emotional dishonesty. It's emotional strategy. It means you're committed to truth, but also to peace. You don't deny what's real. You just respect its power enough to handle it with care. And that care changes how people see you. They feel safe with you, not because you're emotionless, but because you're composed. You don't use emotion as leverage. You don't make others responsible for your regulation. You own your process. This shifts how you experience relationships. You stop needing others to fix your feelings. You stop expecting constant emotional validation. You learn to sit in discomfort without demanding someone else solve it. And because of that, you become a calmer presence in the lives of others. Someone who can witness without reacting. Someone who can speak without raising tension. This also sharpens your self-awareness. When you stop rushing to express, you begin to ask better questions. Why do I feel this? What does it mean? What triggered it? Is this rooted in now or in something old? And the answers to those questions make your emotional world more understandable, more manageable, and more honest. Stillness becomes strength. You carry yourself with a sense of balance that doesn't need performance. You don't need to announce your feelings to feel them. You don't need to break down to be seen. Your quiet becomes your authority, and your ability to wait becomes your clarity. In moments of pressure, that calm is contagious. Others might panic, but you hold the room. Not because you're numb, but because you've practiced stillness long enough to know when speaking adds value and when it adds noise. There's also dignity in privacy. You don't owe everyone an explanation of your inner life. You don't have to share every shift in mood. You don't need to narrate your every reaction. Some things are yours to carry quietly, not out of fear, out of respect for your own process. This quiet strength allows you to choose your audience wisely. When you do decide to speak, it's because you've decided it serves a purpose. Because you trust the space. Because the moment calls for truth, not just release. And in those moments, your words hold weight because they've been filtered through presence, not pressure. The world often rewards loudness, but real depth rarely comes from volume. It comes from knowing what to say, when to say it, and, more importantly, when to keep it for yourself. You begin to notice that people who express everything tend to feel scattered. They live in reaction. They speak from rawness. They confuse vulnerability with impulsiveness. But the ones who build peace speak less often, but more powerfully, because their words are chosen, their timing is thoughtful, and their emotions, though felt deeply, are carried with wisdom. Stillness doesn't mean coldness. It means warmth with direction. It means fire under control. It means not letting a passing emotion burn down something permanent. You don't deny sadness. You just don't turn it into blame. You don't avoid anger. You just don't let it speak for you. You don't suppress hurt. You just allow space between the pain and your response. This space is where maturity lives. This space is where growth happens. Not by ignoring what you feel, but by holding it with respect. And the more you live this way, the more you trust yourself. You no longer fear your feelings. You welcome them. You feel them. But you don't let them lead. You lead them. That shift is what sets you apart. That calm in the storm. That pause before the reply. That grace under pressure. Not because you're perfect, but because you're present. That's the gift of stillness. And in a noisy world, it's one of the most powerful things you can carry. Stillness teaches you to hold emotion without letting it spill everywhere. It gives you the strength to feel deeply without losing direction. But the place where this control matters most is not in solitude. It's in connection. Where words carry the most weight is in the space between two people who care. And sometimes, in those moments of tension and closeness, what keeps the bond intact is not what you say, but what you choose not to. There are points in every relationship where silence becomes a form of protection, not avoidance, not suppression, but sacred restraint, a conscious decision not to let temporary emotion create permanent damage. This is not about bottling up what needs to be shared. It's about knowing that in certain moments, speaking will only add fuel. That timing, tone, and presence mean more than being right or getting it off your chest. The mistake most people make is assuming that love gives permission to speak freely at all times. That closeness erases the need for restraint. But the truth is, the people we're closest to are also the most vulnerable to our words. They trust us more, which means they feel our tone more deeply. They absorb our judgment faster. And when we lose control, even for a moment, the pain we cause cuts sharper than it would coming from anyone else. This is where silence becomes service. You stay quiet, not because you don't care, but because you care enough to protect the space between you. You hold your tongue not out of fear, but out of respect. You choose stillness because the words that want to come out in that moment might be more about your reaction than the truth. And you don't want to punish someone for standing too close when you're in pain. Restraint creates space to calm down. It stops the cycle before it spins out. One raised voice often leads to another. One accusation turns into two. One sharp word plants a seed that can grow into resentment even after an apology. But silence gives room for emotion to settle, for thought to return, for something better than reaction to take its place. There's power in learning to walk away when you feel your words becoming weapons, to step outside, to take a breath, to say, "I need a moment," and mean it. Not to avoid the issue, but to face it from a better place. Because the goal is not to win, it's to understand. And that rarely happens in the heat of the moment. This discipline is not easy. You'll feel the pull to defend yourself, to explain your side, to match their tone. But if you've practiced emotional stillness, you'll recognize the moment. You'll see that your first impulse is often the one that does the most harm, and you'll have the strength to stop, to listen, or to wait. You'll also learn that many arguments are not about the topic being discussed. They're about energy, timing, old wounds, misunderstood tone. When you don't react immediately, you give yourself the chance to notice what's really going on. You might realize the other person isn't angry at you. They're tired, stressed, scared. You might realize you're not really upset with them. You're projecting something else. And when you see this, everything softens. Restraint lets both people stay human. When you give space, the other person feels it. They feel you're not trying to control the moment. They feel you're not forcing understanding. And that trust builds safety. They begin to relax, they begin to open, and a conversation that could have turned into a fight becomes something healing instead. This doesn't mean swallowing every truth. It means choosing the right moment to speak it, the right tone, the right level of calm. When you've had time to reflect, when you're no longer in reaction, when the words can land without being twisted by emotion, that kind of truth is clearer, kinder, and far more effective. In relationships, restraint is not weakness. It's protection, not just of yourself, but of the connection. It's knowing that silence can be stronger than the loudest defense. That timing matters more than volume. That love is shown not just in words, but in the decision not to speak when the words would wound. This kind of silence requires humility. You have to let go of being right. You have to accept that proving your point in the moment might cost you something more important. You have to trust that clarity can come later, and that love strong enough to last will wait for better words. Restraint also keeps you from making your partner the enemy. In moments of emotional heat, it's easy to turn the person you care about into a target. You stop seeing them as a partner and start seeing them as the cause of your pain. But when you hold your reaction, you remember you're on the same team. The problem is not the person. The problem is the disconnection, and your restraint is the first step back toward unity. You also stop saying things just to feel powerful. Sometimes we want to say something that will land, something that hits back, something that leaves a mark. But real love isn't about leaving marks. It's about creating space where both people can feel safe, where words aren't used to win, but to heal. This doesn't mean being passive. It means being wise. You speak when your words can build, not just when they can break. You say what's true, but you wait until the emotion behind it has cooled enough to reveal the truth clearly. You speak from understanding, not from pain. And when it's time to talk, you don't hold back from honesty, but you've let the silence shape your delivery. You speak from a place of clarity, not chaos. And because of that, your partner can hear you. They're not defending. They're not resisting. They're listening. And that's what turns communication into connection. Stillness in relationships isn't cold distance. It's active care. It's taking responsibility for your energy before you ask someone else to hold it. It's pausing before you turn a moment of pain into a pattern of conflict. It's creating safety by choosing not to speak until what you say will move things forward, not backward. Over time, this practice changes the relationship. You argue less, not because issues don't come up, but because you handle them with more grace. You don't fear conflict, but you no longer fuel it. You know how to hold the moment in silence until it's ready for truth. It also teaches both people patience. You stop expecting instant solutions. You let things settle. You learn how to sit with discomfort without needing to fix it immediately. That space becomes a container for maturity, for shared growth, for better understanding. And in that space, you find a different kind of intimacy, one where love is not constantly performed, but quietly preserved, one where trust is built not by constant reassurance, but by consistent restraint, one where safety doesn't come from never being hurt, but from knowing that when hurt happens, it will be handled with care, not fire. This doesn't happen by accident. It happens through practice, through holding back when your whole body wants to speak, through walking away when staying might turn love into war, through remembering that connection matters more than control. You will get it wrong sometimes. You will say things too soon. You will raise your voice when you wish you hadn't. But each time you catch yourself, you're training a new way, a way where silence is no longer emptiness, but presence, no longer distance, but discipline, no longer absence, but love in its highest form. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can say is nothing at all. And let that silence speak for the care you're still learning to express. When you learn to pause in relationships, to protect what matters through silence rather than reaction, you begin to notice something deeper. How you speak to others is often a reflection of how you speak to yourself. If you want more peace on the outside, you have to start within. Because the loudest voice in your life isn't from the people around you, it's the one that lives in your head. And if that voice is untrained, it can quietly pull you away from everything you're trying to build. The way you speak to yourself is the foundation of your behavior, your mood, and your confidence. You hear your own voice more than anyone else's, whether you're aware of it or not. Most people walk through their day carrying a stream of thoughts that judge, doubt, and question. It becomes normal to speak to yourself in a way you would never speak to someone you care about. That quiet commentary becomes a lens, distorting how you see the world, your relationships, and your own capacity. Inner monologue. Discipline is not about pretending to be happy all the time. It's about accuracy. It's about breaking the habit of exaggeration, of cruel self-talk, of assuming the worst. When your internal voice constantly tells you that you're behind, that you're not good enough, that you'll fail again like last time, your nervous system doesn't know it's just talk. Your body tightens, your energy drops, your mind starts looking for proof to match the message. Cleaning up your self-talk means telling the truth with care. It means catching yourself in moments of automatic self-criticism and choosing a different path. Instead of, "I can't believe I messed that up," you say, "That didn't go well, but I can learn from it." Instead of, "I'm never going to figure this out," you say, "This is difficult, but I've handled difficult before." The words shift from judgment to responsibility, from attack to reflection. This shift isn't about becoming delusional. It's about replacing lazy thinking with honest, productive thought. Negative inner speech often takes the easy way. It makes generalizations. It repeats the past. It speaks in absolutes. But discipline forces you to slow down and be more precise. What really happened? What can be done now? What is actually true? Most people think of discipline as action, waking up early, finishing what you start. But mental discipline starts before any of that. It starts with thought. Because if your internal voice is constantly working against you, every external effort will be heavier. You may still make progress, but it will feel like a battle you're always losing just beneath the surface. Changing this voice starts with awareness. You begin listening to your own thoughts as if they belong to someone else. You notice how often your words are critical instead of constructive, how often you replay mistakes instead of learning from them, how often you imagine failure instead of planning calmly. That awareness is the first step to gaining control. Then you begin to replace the tone. You don't try to force positivity. You don't fake confidence. You train accuracy with compassion. You say what is true, and you say it in a way that moves you forward. "I feel stuck right now" is honest. "I'm worthless" is not. "I'm tired today" is real. "I'm lazy" is not. One builds clarity, the other feeds shame. This practice doesn't make problems disappear, it makes them easier to face. You become your own anchor, your own reset button. You stop needing external reassurance because you've trained your internal voice to hold the line. And in difficult moments, that voice is what keeps you steady. Your inner monologue also affects how you treat others. When you speak to yourself harshly, you often project that energy. You become more critical, more impatient, more reactive. But when your inner voice is steady, kind, and firm, you extend that same presence outward. You listen better. You speak with more care. You connect from balance, not need. Over time, this discipline builds resilience. You stop falling apart after a setback because your thoughts don't spiral. You stop quitting early because you no longer confuse discomfort with failure. You stop shrinking under pressure because your self-talk is not an attack. It's a guide. It pushes you, but it does not punish you. This also improves how you handle success. When your inner voice is trained, you don't fear achievement. You don't sabotage progress because you feel unworthy. You don't dismiss wins as luck. You acknowledge the effort, the consistency, the growth. and that creates momentum instead of resistance. You also become more emotionally stable. Inner dialogue that's grounded in truth helps you process feelings more clearly. You don't get lost in stories. You don't assign meaning to every mood. You learn how to feel something without turning it into a full identity. I feel anxious stays smaller than I am broken. That language matters. It changes what happens next. This practice sharpens your ability to recover. You stop wasting time criticizing yourself and move directly to course correction. You face mistakes without falling apart. You see feedback as information, not as a personal attack. You hold high standards, but you hold them with care. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy of peace. You don't need to earn every bit of rest or kindness. Your inner voice starts to reflect that, and the more it does, the less reactive you become to outside judgment. Other people's opinions may still sting, but they don't define you, because you've already built something more consistent inside. Even your physical health can change. The brain and body are connected. Harsh inner dialogue raises stress. It affects sleep, energy, digestion, and more. When your thoughts become calmer and more encouraging, your body responds. You feel more rested. You move with more ease. You recover faster from strain. This doesn't mean you never feel doubt or fear again. It means you meet those feelings with structure. You don't fight them, you face them. You hear the thought and you ask, is this useful? Is this true? And if not, you replace it, not with fantasy, but with a better question, a clearer plan, or a kinder word. And when life gets hard, and it will, you don't collapse. You don't turn against yourself. You don't look in the mirror and see only flaws. You look and see someone who is still learning, still growing, still standing, because the voice inside you now sounds like someone you can trust. Inner monologue. Discipline is not a one-time fix. It's a daily reset, a choice you make in small moments, when you drop something, when you're late, when you forget a task, when someone doubts you. Instead of slipping into self-hate or fear, you choose calm correction. You choose ownership without cruelty. And every time you make that choice, your internal voice becomes stronger, more grounded, more loyal, and it follows you into every part of life. Work becomes more focused. Relationships become more honest. Self-respect grows deeper. You speak better to yourself, so you begin to live better, think better, lead better. And none of it is loud or dramatic. It's quiet, simple, consistent. That's how transformation happens, from the inside out, not with perfect conditions, not with outside praise, but with a steady voice that says, I've got you. Let's keep going. One step at a time, no shame, just truth, just growth. Because when your inner voice changes, everything else does too. When your inner voice becomes clearer, calmer, and more disciplined, the world outside begins to feel different too. But sometimes, to maintain that clarity, you need space, not just quiet moments in your day, but full withdrawal. Not out of sadness or weakness, but from the strength of knowing when to step back and reset. In a world where constant connection is mistaken for importance, walking away briefly can be the most powerful choice you make. Social withdrawal is often misunderstood. People assume that stepping away means something is wrong, that solitude equals loneliness, that distance means disconnection. But there is a type of solitude that restores rather than isolates. It is chosen, not forced. It is not escape. It is return. A return to your own thoughts, to your rhythm, to your priorities. It is a pause designed to recalibrate. The Stoics believed deeply in the value of this kind of withdrawal, not forever, not as rejection of society, but as a way to stay grounded while living in a world that constantly pulls you in 100 directions. Because when you're always surrounded by others, by their opinions, their habits, their urgency, you start to drift. You adopt worries that aren't yours. You agree with ideas you haven't examined. You move with momentum that isn't aligned with your direction. Temporary isolation is how you stop that drift. You remove yourself from the noise so you can hear what you really think, what you truly feel, and what you actually want, without the pressure to perform, to explain, to answer. You are not trying to disappear. You are trying to remember. This kind of withdrawal is not dramatic. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to explain it. You just begin to create space. You decline the invitation. You put your phone away. You go for the walk alone. You let the silence stretch. And in that stretch, something returns. Focus, clarity, simplicity. You begin to notice how much of your time is shaped by reaction. Responding to messages, to comments, to updates, to plans. You are rarely just being. You are always responding. But withdrawal cuts that loop. It gives you time to choose again, not just continue. During this space, you observe what pulls at you, what thoughts rise without influence, what habits remain when no one is watching, and what dreams still feel true when you're not performing them for anyone else. These are the markers of your real path, not what's loudest, but what lasts in silence. Social withdrawal doesn't mean rejecting people. It means restoring yourself, so that when you return, you are sharper, more focused, more centered. Your presence is not fragmented. Your mind is not full of others' voices. You've returned to the sound of your own reasoning, and that changes how you engage with everyone else. This practice also reveals where your boundaries have been too loose. When you step away, you see which connections energize you and which ones drain you. You notice which conversations leave you grounded and which ones fill you with confusion or tension. That information is gold. It helps you reset where your time goes. You learn to stop overextending. You don't say yes out of guilt. You don't answer messages out of fear of missing out. You don't force energy into places that no longer align with your direction. You move from clarity, not from habit. Withdrawal also creates deeper creativity. Without the noise of constant interaction, your thoughts stretch into places they haven't gone in a while. New ideas emerge, connections appear. You remember projects you had pushed aside. You feel inspired again, not by others, but by stillness. This solitude also exposes your dependencies. How much you rely on others' approval to feel valid. How often you check for updates to feel included. How quickly you reach out when discomfort hits. Withdrawal removes the shield of social reinforcement, and what's left is a clearer view of where your confidence is built and where it needs work. But this kind of self-inquiry is not painful. It's empowering, because once you see your patterns, you can change them. You stop being owned by distraction. You start choosing where your energy goes, who gets access to you, and how you show up when you're around others. This space also resets your nervous system. Constant social interaction, especially digital, activates parts of your brain that never rest. You're always slightly alert, slightly on guard. Withdrawal allows your body to come down. Your breath deepens, your thoughts slow. You move from reaction into reflection. In this state, you begin to think in longer arcs. You stop obsessing over the next hour and start reflecting on the next season of your life. You see what needs to change, not just immediately, but deeply. And because no one is watching, you can be honest. You don't need to protect an image. You don't need to prove anything. You just reflect. That kind of reflection creates a stronger version of you, not louder, not busier, just more whole. Someone who can enter any room without absorbing the tension. Someone who can listen without losing themselves. Someone who knows who they are, not because of what others say, but because they've taken the time to find out in silence. This practice doesn't require a mountain cabin or a retreat. It can start today, by claiming 1 hour without noise, 1 evening without distraction, 1 weekend without responding. Not because you're shutting the world out, but because you're tuning back into yourself. The effects of this are not temporary. The insights you gain stay with you. The calm becomes your baseline. The clarity changes your decisions. And when you re-engage with others, you don't come back overwhelmed. You come back rooted. People will feel the difference. You won't be as reactive. You won't be as easily pulled into gossip, urgency, or comparison. You'll move slower, but with more certainty. You'll listen more, but speak with more impact. You'll give less of your time away, but offer more presence when you do. This isn't about becoming isolated. It's about becoming selective. You've trained yourself to filter noise. You don't need constant input. You don't need constant approval. You've built a space within that holds you steady. And from that space, your relationships improve, because you're not coming into them needing to be filled. You're coming in already full. Your silence has already reminded you of your worth, your direction, your truth. That is the purpose of withdrawal, not to hide, but to return stronger. Not to run away, but to stand still long enough to hear what matters. And when you can hear it again, you know where to go next. Not because the world told you, but because your own voice finally had room to speak. Coming out of purposeful withdrawal, you carry with you a quieter mind and a sharper lens. The noise fades, the distractions lessen, and a more grounded version of yourself begins to lead. But this new inner clarity brings with it a surprising challenge: how to handle the pressure to speak on everything. In a world where everyone rushes to have a take, share a thought, or be the first to respond, there's a quiet strength in learning to say something few are willing to admit: I don't know. There is a strong pull to be seen as knowledgeable, to be the one who always has insight, the one who never hesitates. But constantly offering opinions can become a mask, a way to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty, a way to feed the ego instead of feeding the truth. Because the more you speak about things you haven't fully studied or deeply experienced, the more your credibility becomes built on sand. The mind loves certainty. It craves the safety of a confident statement. But real wisdom grows from restraint, from being willing to pause before you speak, from the humility to say, I need to learn more before I give a view. That sentence is not weakness, it is honesty. And in many situations, it is the most powerful response you can give. When you give opinions too easily, you stop learning. You become more focused on being heard than on discovering what's real. You start speaking from assumptions instead of from experience. Over time, that habit creates a barrier between you and truth. You stop asking deep questions. You stop listening. You stop growing. The danger of habitual opinion giving is that it slowly replaces curiosity with conclusion. It makes you think you've reached a level of knowing that doesn't require exploration anymore. And that's where ego thrives. Ego doesn't want to look foolish. It doesn't want to be quiet while others speak. It wants to lead the conversation, even if it has nothing useful to say. Saying, "I don't know," interrupts that cycle. It resets the ego. It opens a door to understanding. It creates space for a real answer to arrive. And in that space, respect grows, not because you knew everything, but because you were honest enough not to fake it. People often confuse silence with incompetence, but true presence doesn't need constant commentary. It watches, it waits, it listens deeply. And when it finally speaks, it says something that adds clarity rather than clutter. The habit of constantly having a take on everything damages your presence. Others begin to expect noise instead of value. Your words lose weight. They blend into the background. But when you're known for only speaking when it matters, for withholding opinions until you've earned them, every word you share lands with more force. In conversations, this creates balance. You no longer feel the need to dominate the exchange. You stop trying to prove your intelligence through volume. Instead, you become more interested in asking the right questions. You create space for others to bring their ideas forward without feeling corrected. And from that place, connection deepens. You also stop rushing to fill silence. Most people are uncomfortable with gaps in dialogue. They fill them with half-formed thoughts or recycled ideas. But when you're grounded in humility, silence becomes a friend, a tool, a place where real thought can form. Not having an opinion doesn't mean you lack insight. It means you're protecting your integrity. You're honoring the process of thinking. You're being responsible with your voice. And over time, that responsibility builds credibility. In group settings, especially in leadership or influence roles, there's pressure to weigh in on everything. But offering opinions without depth can backfire. It signals that you care more about presence than substance, that you speak to be seen, not to serve. But when you step back, listen, gather input, and only then offer a view, people trust that you're not reacting, but responding. This trust is what sustains influence, not performance, not constant commentary, but discernment. The ability to hold your view lightly until it's been tested, to release the need to sound certain and instead be certain that learning is more important than being right. Ego resists this. It wants to win the moment, to be praised, to never be caught unsure. But growth requires space for being unsure, for asking, for learning publicly. And when you're secure enough to do that, you model real strength. You give others permission to do the same. Your thinking becomes sharper. You stop jumping to conclusions. You stop labeling things too quickly. You give ideas room to breathe. And the more you do that, the more you begin to see the layers beneath surface-level takes. You notice nuances that others miss because they spoke too soon. Saying, "I don't know," doesn't mean disengaging. It means staying engaged responsibly. It means staying humble even when you're experienced, staying curious even when you're confident, and staying honest, always, about the limits of your current understanding. This shift affects your self-talk too. You stop pressuring yourself to know everything. You let yourself be a student again. You value progress over performance. You ask questions more freely. You admit gaps in your knowledge without shame. And as a result, your learning accelerates. You also become more comfortable with complexity. Life doesn't offer clean answers to everything. Some things take time to understand. Some questions need to sit in silence for a while. The more you can hold that tension without rushing to resolve it, the more mentally flexible you become. This skill translates into real-world decisions. You stop reacting based on what sounds good. You start pausing to investigate. You're slower to speak, but faster to understand. You make fewer mistakes, and when you do, you own them more quickly because you're not trying to maintain the illusion of knowing it all. The paradox is that by admitting you don't know, you become wiser. You create space for better information to come in, for better ideas to emerge. And people respect that. They begin to trust you, not because you always speak, but because when you do, it's meaningful. Your conversations change. They become less about showing off and more about discovering together, less about being impressive and more about being useful. You don't walk into rooms needing to lead. You walk in ready to learn. And often, that quiet confidence draws others to you. You also begin to attract the right kind of people, those who value honesty over ego, depth over flash, growth over appearance. And those relationships last longer, run deeper, and bring more fulfillment. This discipline requires daily practice. It means checking yourself before you speak, asking, "Do I truly understand this?" Or, "Is this adding value or just filling space?" It means being okay with silence, with mystery, with gaps in your knowledge, and not letting insecurity push you to fake clarity. Over time, you begin to enjoy not knowing, not as an excuse, but as an opening. You're no longer threatened by uncertainty. You're energized by it, because you know that from that space, something true can finally take shape. This is how humility sharpens wisdom. Not through dramatic gestures, but through the quiet discipline of speaking less and thinking more. Through the daily choice to hold back when unsure. And the steady effort to earn your opinions through experience, not assumption. Because in a culture that rewards quick answers, those who pause, learn, and only then speak, those are the ones who build something lasting, something real, something worth following. Let others rush. Let others pretend. You stay still. You say, "I don't know." And then you go find out. Not for applause, but for truth. And that truth, once earned, needs no defense, only presence. Choosing not to speak on what you don't truly understand is a powerful shift. You begin to speak less, but with greater care. And as your ego steps back, your words start to matter more, not because they are loud, but because they are chosen. The next step is learning to speak with precision, not abundance. To remove the unnecessary and to shape your speech like a blade, clean, sharp, and controlled. This is minimalist speech, and it changes everything. Speaking less is not about holding back insight. It's about removing excess, trimming filler, and letting each word carry weight. When you reduce verbal clutter, your speech starts to command attention. People listen more because you don't waste their time. Your words signal intention. There's no guessing. There's no confusion. Just clarity. In most conversations, people over-explain. They repeat themselves. They soften strong messages with extra words. They talk in circles, not because they lack something to say, but because they fear that saying it simply might not be enough. But the truth is, simplicity builds trust. When your words are direct and grounded, people begin to associate your voice with certainty. This is not about speaking coldly or with indifference. It's about control. Verbal minimalism shows that you've thought things through, that you don't need fluff to make a point, that your ideas are clear enough to stand on their own, and clarity, when paired with calm delivery, becomes magnetism. Reducing words also teaches patience. You don't rush to fill silence. you pause, you measure, you wait. And in that space, others lean in. They begin to listen more closely because you've built the habit of speaking only when it matters. Your voice becomes a signal, not just sound. This skill applies in every setting. In leadership, it builds authority. A leader who rambles sends the message that they are uncertain or trying to convince. A leader who speaks with precision shows they have already done the thinking. Their voice brings direction, not noise. Their team listens more closely, not because they talk more, but because they talk less. In negotiations, fewer words mean more control. You say what's needed and then stop. The silence after your words forces others to respond. It creates tension in a productive way. It leaves space for others to react first, often revealing more than they intended. You don't speak to explain every angle. You speak to anchor the conversation. In relationships, minimalist speech brings calm. It reduces misunderstandings. You say what you mean without dressing it up in emotion or overcomplication. You're less reactive. You don't blurt things out. You reflect before you respond. You speak with care, and in doing so, you earn more respect, not by dominating, but by being consistent. This practice also improves how you communicate in writing. You stop using long sentences when short ones work better. You remove filler phrases. You let the message speak. This improves every email, every message, every note. It also sharpens your thinking. Because writing is a reflection of thought, cleaner writing means a clearer mind. Minimalist speech is not dry. It's powerful because it's unforced. It's honest, not rehearsed. You don't try to impress with vocabulary. You don't overuse emphasis. You choose language that's clean and direct. And that directness is rare, which is why it stands out. One of the biggest benefits of speaking minimally is that it reduces emotional leakage. You don't use extra words to cover up discomfort. You don't exaggerate to sound more certain. You say what is without adding weight that doesn't belong. And people begin to trust that what you say is what you mean. You also stop diluting your messages with unnecessary qualifiers. Words like just, maybe, sort of, or I think start to fall away. Instead of I just wanted to say, you say, here's what I see. Instead of I kind of feel like, you say, I feel. This doesn't make you blunt, it makes you clear. It removes doubt from your message. When you speak less, you become a better listener. You stop waiting for your turn to talk. You stop formulating responses mid-conversation. You start hearing the full message others are giving. And when you finally speak, you're responding from full understanding, not partial assumption. Minimalism also helps you conserve energy. Long conversations that say little become shorter. You don't drain yourself with unnecessary talking. You stay focused. You end meetings sooner. You get to the point faster. This energy can then be used for deeper work, better relationships, and clearer decision-making. It trains your thinking as well. You start forming ideas in tighter shapes. You ask yourself, what's essential here? What's the real message? How can I say this without distraction? This thinking transfers to how you approach problems, design solutions, and manage time. People often assume that more speech equals more impact, but it's the opposite. Over-explaining, over-qualifying, and oversharing can reduce impact. When you strip away what's not necessary, you create space for what is. You trust your words to stand on their own, and others do too. This way of speaking also earns more room in tense situations. When people know you don't talk just to talk, they give your voice more attention. When you finally do express a disagreement or concern, it carries more weight. You don't need to raise your volume to be heard. The content of your message is enough. It also lowers misinterpretation. The fewer words you use, the harder it is to twist your meaning. There's no excess to distort. This reduces conflict. It makes your interactions more productive. You spend less time clarifying, correcting, and restating. This shift doesn't require perfection. It requires commitment to clarity. You start small. You pause before speaking. You ask yourself, can I say this in fewer words? Is this necessary? Does it serve the conversation? And with each attempt, your speech becomes cleaner. You also become more comfortable with not filling silence. Others might rush to speak, trying to escape the discomfort of quiet. But you've trained yourself to sit in that stillness. You've detached from the pressure to perform. That calm silence becomes part of your message. The less you say, the more people remember what you do say. In a world of constant talk, your restraint makes your presence stand out. Your words become markers, anchors, something people refer back to, not because you spoke often, but because you spoke well. You also protect your reputation. Fewer words mean fewer chances to say something you regret. You reduce exposure to misunderstandings. You avoid emotional outbursts. You show discipline, not just in thought, but in delivery. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you effective. It doesn't make you invisible. It makes you intentional. And the more intentional your speech, the more people lean into what you're really saying. They know it's been thought through. They know it's rooted. Minimalist speech becomes a personal brand. You're known as the person who speaks with precision, who listens more than they interrupt, who doesn't waste time, who moves with clarity and leaves space for others to do the same. This way of speaking also brings peace. You're no longer caught in loops of trying to impress or over-explain. You trust your presence. You trust your thoughts. You know that your value doesn't increase with volume. It increases with awareness. Minimalism in speech is discipline in motion. It's how you communicate respect for yourself, for others, and for the time you all share. You don't talk over people. You don't fill silence with noise. You don't chase validation through conversation. You speak when it counts. And when you do, it lands. Because your words are not just heard, they're felt. They are few, but they are full. And that fullness commands more than any excess ever could. As you begin speaking less, but with more clarity, you naturally start noticing something deeper. How much of what we say is not about sharing truth, but about being seen. Once your words are no longer used to prove your worth, another question begins to rise quietly. What if you didn't need to be recognized at all? What if being known was no longer your goal? In a world obsessed with visibility, obscurity becomes a rare and misunderstood path. We're taught to chase attention, that to matter, you must be seen, that your value increases with your audience. That influence depends on exposure, but this idea creates a trap, one where your peace, your purpose, and your energy are tied to how loudly your presence echoes in the world. Letting go of the need to be seen is not about shrinking, it's about freedom. When you stop trying to be noticed, you start becoming deeply effective. You pour energy into the work itself, not the image of the work. You start doing things not for praise, but because they are right. Your sense of fulfillment moves from the external to the internal, and that shift gives you back your power. Constantly seeking to be noticed drains you. It ties your self-worth to response. You feel high when you're praised. You feel low when you're ignored. You keep adjusting your path to stay relevant, to stay liked, to stay visible. Slowly, your direction bends toward attention rather than authenticity. You forget what you were building. You only remember what people want. Obscurity protects you from that pull. It gives you space to grow in silence, to focus without comparison, to work without pressure. When you embrace not being seen, your effort becomes cleaner. It's not filtered through ego. It's not edited for an audience. It's shaped by purpose. The most meaningful parts of your growth often happen in silence. No one claps when you heal. No one watches you choose discipline in the dark. No one celebrates your quiet breakthroughs. But that doesn't make them less real. It makes them more real, because they're not for show. They are for you. There is honor in not needing applause. You walk your path knowing most won't notice. You do the hard thing even when no one sees it. You build something that might never be trending, but will always be true. And that kind of work lasts. When you let go of the need to be known, you stop measuring your life by likes, by followers, by public praise. You measure it by alignment, by clarity, by how deeply you're living the values you've chosen. And in that, there is peace. This doesn't mean hiding forever. It means learning to be full even in quiet, to be content without being celebrated, to know that your value doesn't depend on recognition. The more you practice this, the more stable you become. You're no longer shaken by being overlooked. You no longer fear not being included. You're not building for visibility. You're building for meaning. Obscurity also protects your process. When fewer people are watching, you're free to experiment. You can fail without public shame. You can change direction without defending it. You can take your time. Growth doesn't need a spotlight. It needs patience. And patience is easier when you're not performing. Many people stop growing because they grow too loudly. They start sharing their plans too early. They start shaping their work to be liked, not to be true. And the moment they get attention, they become afraid to lose it. So they freeze. They stop taking risks. They stop telling the truth. They start repeating what already worked. And eventually, they lose themselves. Staying unknown for a while is not a step backward. It's a place where you build roots. The deeper those roots go, the taller you can grow later. Not for fame, but for impact. And even if no one ever sees what you've built, you'll know it's real. That's enough. Obscurity also creates humility. You don't assume your voice deserves attention just because you spoke. You don't expect recognition just because you tried. You learn to earn respect through action, through consistency, through showing up when no one is clapping. That kind of respect is not loud, but it is lasting. There's also a deeper kind of pride that forms in this space. Not arrogance, but dignity. The kind that comes from knowing you didn't chase attention. You built something steady. You chose stillness over spotlight. You stayed true when no one was looking. And now, if you are seen, it's a reflection of the work, not a replacement for it. Letting go of the need to be heard allows you to listen more. You become less concerned with your own narrative and more curious about truth. You stop trying to control perception and start aligning with purpose. You let your identity be shaped by what you are, not what you appear to be. This shift makes your presence stronger. People feel something different when they're around someone who's not trying to be impressive. You feel grounded, focused, calm. You don't rush to be validated. You don't fill the air with self-promotion. You're okay with being quiet. And in that quiet, people begin to listen more closely. You also stop fearing the moments when you're overlooked. Because you've learned that attention is not the same as value. You've seen how chasing visibility can blur vision, and you've chosen clarity instead. You stay in your lane even when others race past. You stay loyal to your craft even when it's unnoticed, because your worth is not up for sale. This way of living brings clarity to what you create. Whether it's a project, a relationship, a habit, or a life, you stop shaping it to be seen. You shape it to be strong. You remove what doesn't matter. You add what does. And slowly, the need to impress fades. In its place, something real begins to form. Even in moments where attention finds you, you stay grounded. You don't become addicted to the spotlight. You don't perform for it. You acknowledge it and keep working. You let your consistency speak louder than your visibility. You let your presence matter more than your performance. The discipline of obscurity also sharpens your intentions. You're not building so others can watch. You're building because it's in you. Because something inside wants to be expressed, whether anyone sees it or not. That kind of intention is pure, and that purity creates work and character that endures. In this space, comparison begins to dissolve. You stop measuring your timeline against others. You stop judging your progress by how loud it is. You stay close to what's real. You trust the slow path. You begin to enjoy anonymity, not as punishment, but as privilege. You're free to be without expectation. This doesn't mean you reject recognition if it comes. It means you no longer depend on it. You receive it, but don't chase it. You hear it, but don't need it. And that freedom allows you to keep creating, keep growing, keep showing up, with or without an audience. The reward for letting go of being known is inner stability. You're not always looking over your shoulder. You're not always refreshing the page. You're not living for a reaction. You're living from a deeper place, one that no spotlight can build and none can take away. Because in the end, the most powerful lives are not always the loudest. They are the ones lived with quiet purpose, quiet strength, quiet conviction. That's the kind of legacy that doesn't need a platform. It needs only your full presence, your honest effort, and the courage to be real, even when no one's watching. After letting go of the need to be seen, after learning to find peace in doing meaningful work without the spotlight, you arrive at a deeper level of stillness, one that isn't just about how you live, but how you speak, or rather, how you don't speak. Because even when the ego is quiet, the tongue can still stay busy. And sometimes the next step is not to say less, but to say nothing at all. Verbal fasting is the practice of choosing silence completely for a set period of time. It could be one day a week or even a few focused hours. But the principle is simple. Remove words, not as punishment, not as withdrawal, but as a tool for sharpening the mind, resetting your nervous system, and returning to presence. Speech is powerful, but it's also tiring. Every word you speak requires a decision. Every conversation carries emotional weight. Even small talk draws from your energy reserves. And when your days are filled with constant verbal output, you don't realize how much noise you carry until you stop. When you commit to a period of silence, something shifts. At first, there's discomfort. You want to explain, to comment, to fill the space. Your mind starts producing dialogue out of habit. But soon, as you resist the urge, the mind slows down. You begin to listen more deeply, not just to others, but to your own internal state. Thoughts that once passed unnoticed now rise to the surface. Feelings that were blurred by noise become clear. In this silence, your thoughts become sharper. You notice the way your mind leaps from one idea to the next. You start to observe the patterns, how quickly judgment forms, how often you want to interrupt, how much of your speech is habitual rather than intentional. This insight doesn't come through effort, it comes through stillness. Verbal fasting gives your brain rest. It reduces the cognitive load of constant conversation. And in that rest, your nervous system gets a chance to regulate. You're no longer preparing responses. You're no longer filtering your words. You're just observing. And that observation begins to clean up the mental clutter. This practice also increases your appreciation for words. After hours without speaking, the first thing you say feels more valuable. You're aware of its purpose. You've been quiet long enough to feel its impact. And that awareness carries into the days that follow. You start to speak with more care, more presence, more discipline. The benefits aren't just internal. People around you begin to notice the shift. Your presence feels more grounded. Your energy is calmer. You're less reactive, more thoughtful, more engaged when it counts. Silence teaches you that being available doesn't mean being constantly verbal. You can be fully present without saying anything at all. Verbal fasting can also highlight how much of your speech is unnecessary. You start to see how often you speak to escape discomfort, to avoid silence, to impress, to manage other people's emotions, to fill time. Once you sit in silence, those impulses are exposed, and from there, they can be refined. Even in the digital world, this practice applies. Silence doesn't only mean not speaking. It also means not texting, not commenting, not posting. A full verbal fast includes disengaging from the platforms where your words still go out into the world. That kind of withdrawal allows your attention to return inward, where real clarity forms. This isn't about isolating yourself. It's about training a different kind of presence. One that doesn't need to speak in order to connect. One that finds meaning in awareness, not performance. One that sees stillness as a source of strength, not weakness. You'll start to notice the shift after just one session. Your thoughts are more ordered. Your body is more relaxed. You feel less pulled by the urgency of conversation. You come back to language with renewed purpose. Over time, this becomes a ritual. A day each week where you return to silence. A pocket of time where you reset your energy, your mind, your focus. The more consistently you practice it, the more sensitive you become to noise, and the more you protect your peace. Verbal fasting also strengthens your willpower. You're choosing silence even when you don't have to. You're holding space even when you want to fill it. That choice, repeated weekly, becomes a form of internal leadership. You prove to yourself that you're not ruled by the need to speak, that you can hold your own tension, that your presence is enough. As with any practice, it gets easier with repetition. The initial restlessness fades. The anxiety around being unreachable dissolves. What's left is simplicity, clarity, freedom. You begin to realize that most of the answers you seek don't come from talking more. They come from pausing long enough to hear what you already know. Verbal fasting also improves your ability to listen, not just to others, but to life itself, to the rhythm of your own body, to the quiet pull of your intuition, to the truth that speaks without language. By the end of your silence, you'll speak again, but differently, more slowly, more mindfully, with fewer wasted words and more intention behind each one. That's the point. Not silence forever, but silence that transforms. So give yourself that space. Block the time. Let people know, or don't. Step away from language. Step into presence. Let the world go on without your commentary. And in that stillness, find yourself again. You won't need to say much afterward. Your calm will speak for you. After spending time in deliberate silence, after training yourself to speak only when it serves, something interesting starts to happen. You begin to see conversations differently. You start to feel the urge to correct others less. You notice how often people are wrong, not just in facts, but in perception, in interpretation, in attitude, and you begin to realize that not all of it needs to be addressed. In fact, much of it is best left untouched. There is a quiet humility in allowing others to be wrong. Not because you agree, and not because you're indifferent, but because you understand that truth doesn't always need your defense. Correction is not always the highest form of wisdom. Sometimes restraint reveals far more strength. The habit of correcting others often comes from ego. You want to show what you know. You want to be the one who sets the record straight. It feels good to fix, to clarify, to adjust the facts. But the moment you make a correction, you shift the energy of the interaction. You create tension. You place yourself in a superior position, and while that might boost your sense of control, it rarely builds connection. Letting people be wrong is not giving up. It's choosing what matters. You understand that not every conversation is a battleground. Not every mistake needs a response. Not every flawed opinion is your responsibility. And when you let it pass, you conserve energy, preserve peace, and maintain dignity. It also reflects maturity. A person secure in their understanding does not need constant reinforcement. They don't chase validation through correction. They don't interrupt to showcase their intelligence. They know what they know, and they know that proving it isn't always productive. There are times, of course, when truth must be spoken, when silence would harm more than help, when misunderstanding would lead to damage. But those moments are fewer than we think. Most of the time, the need to correct arises not from necessity, but from discomfort. You want to control the moment. You want to reshape someone's thinking. But real influence isn't about control. It's about presence, listening more than you instruct, understanding more than you explain. Allowing others to be wrong gives them space to grow. It respects their process. You may see their error clearly, but you trust they will either come to the truth on their own or not. Either way, it's their journey. You're not responsible for guiding every mind to the right conclusion, especially not when your correction would only trigger defensiveness or pride. This kind of patience is powerful. You watch the conversation unfold without inserting yourself. You notice the temptation to speak, and you let it pass. You hold your peace, not because you're passive, but because you're wise enough to see the cost of unnecessary correction. You also stop taking it personally when someone is wrong in your presence. You don't feel insulted by ignorance. You don't feel the need to fix every flawed idea to feel whole. Your identity is not tied to always being right or to always being seen as right. This freedom brings calm. You listen without agenda. You engage without competition. You're not hunting for mistakes. You're present in the flow of connection. And others feel safer around you. They feel less judged, more heard. And that safety opens the door to deeper understanding. Sometimes, your silence becomes the most respectful response. It says, "I trust you to think for yourself." It says, "I don't need to win this moment." It says, "I care more about our connection than about correcting your misstep." You also begin to notice the difference between helpful correction and performative correction. The first is gentle, offered at the right time, with no desire to show superiority. The second is disguised pride. It exists to make the speaker feel powerful, clever, or morally superior. Learning to spot the difference in your own motivation changes everything. When your intention is pure, you correct only when it serves the other person, not when it serves your ego, not when it makes you feel important, and not when it's just about proving a point. This practice transforms relationships. Especially in close ones, the habit of correcting can slowly wear down connection. A partner, a friend, or a colleague doesn't need to be constantly reminded of their missteps. They need space to feel understood, to feel safe making mistakes without being picked apart. Letting things go builds trust. You choose peace over precision. You choose respect over control. You choose to be someone whose presence feels steady, not sharp. This is not passivity, it's strategic restraint. You're not silent out of weakness, you're silent out of respect for timing, tone, and purpose. And that silence becomes wisdom. You also become a better learner. When you're not always trying to correct, you're more open to receive. You listen fully without preparing a reply. You hear not just the content, but the meaning behind it. And often, that deeper listening reveals something you would have missed if you'd spoken too soon. The humility to not correct doesn't mean you abandon truth. It means you elevate the conversation above ego. You step back and ask, is this necessary? Is this helpful? Is this the right time? And if the answer is no, you wait, or you say nothing. This also reduces conflict. Many arguments begin not because of deep issues, but because of small corrections that escalate. You point out something minor. They defend. You push. They push back. And what could have passed quietly becomes a long, tiring detour. With discipline, you start avoiding these unnecessary roads. You choose quiet understanding over loud correction. In professional spaces, this skill becomes a mark of leadership. Leaders who constantly correct erode morale, but leaders who allow room for growth, who guide gently, who know when to hold back, create a culture of trust. Their correction, when it does come, is more impactful, because it's rare, deliberate, and always in service of the team, not the ego. You also become more aware of your own imperfections. When you stop jumping to correct others, you become more humble about your own gaps. You remember that you don't know everything, that you've been wrong before, that you're still learning, and that shared humanity softens your need to appear above anyone else. This mindset brings emotional freedom. You don't carry the burden of always needing to intervene. You stop feeling responsible for managing every detail. You let people be. You let life unfold. And in that letting go, you find more peace than constant correction ever gave you. You learn to correct only when it adds clarity, not when it feeds pride. You speak only when silence would be a disservice, and you do it without arrogance, without pressure, without needing to be right in every exchange. That kind of speech is respected, not because it's forceful, but because it's clean, it's measured, it's rare, it carries depth, not dominance. Mastery is not about correcting more, it's about knowing when correction isn't needed, when silence serves better, when letting go preserves more than proving a point ever could. So the next time someone is wrong in your presence, pause, breathe. Ask yourself what really needs to happen here. Often the answer will surprise you, because the highest response is not always a correction. Sometimes it's restraint. Sometimes it's silence, and sometimes it's simply the grace to let someone figure it out in their own time, without you needing to interfere. After you've developed the humility to let others be wrong without needing to step in, you begin to feel a shift in how you use your voice. You no longer speak to correct, to win, or to show what you know. And from that stillness grows a deeper question. What is the real purpose of your words? That question leads to a turning point, speaking no longer to impress, but to serve. Every time you speak, energy is transferred. It moves into the space around you and affects the people within it. That energy can uplift, focus, and heal, or it can take up space without adding value. Many people speak from a place of performance. Their words are crafted to sound clever, to attract attention, to win approval. But those words, no matter how sharp or well-formed, often leave no lasting impact. Because their root is not service, it is self. When you begin to speak from a place of service, the tone changes. You speak not to be impressive, but to be useful. You speak not to control the room, but to bring clarity into it. You measure your words by their effect, not by how they reflect on you. This changes everything. The habit of performing in conversation is subtle. It can sound like over-explaining, name-dropping, turning every story back to yourself, or speaking with an inflated tone. It often looks like sharing ideas, not because they help, but because they show your intelligence. This kind of speech builds a wall. People may nod, but they don't connect. They may hear you, but they don't feel seen by you. Service-oriented speech does the opposite. It lowers walls. It meets others where they are. It leaves people better than it found them. This doesn't mean being soft or withholding truth. It means choosing words that guide instead of dominate, that invite instead of impress. When your intent shifts from ego to contribution, people notice. You stop talking just to fill silence. You start listening more. You don't enter rooms trying to prove something. You enter curious about what the room needs. And when you do speak, your voice carries weight, not because it demands attention, but because it offers something real. This shift is rooted in awareness. Before you speak, you ask yourself, who is this for? Why am I saying this? Will it help? If the answer is yes, you speak with clarity. If the answer is no, you wait. That discipline builds respect. It makes your speech cleaner and your presence more trusted. Serving with your words often means saying less. You no longer chase cleverness. You chase clarity. You don't decorate your speech. You distill it. You stop trying to be interesting. You try to be useful. That change creates connection. People feel safe in your presence. Not because you say everything right, but because they know you're not speaking to elevate yourself. You're speaking to lift them. You also become a better listener, because you're no longer preparing your next impressive point. Your attention goes deeper into the person in front of you. You hear things others miss. You notice tension behind their tone. You hear what they're not saying. And when you finally respond, your words feel tailored, not recycled. Speaking to serve also improves the quality of advice. You stop offering guidance just to sound wise. You don't give feedback unless it's welcome. You don't jump in to fix something that isn't yours to fix. Instead, you ask better questions. You listen longer. You speak when the moment is ripe, and your words land more deeply because of it. In group settings, your energy changes the room. You don't compete for airtime. You don't interrupt to steer the spotlight. You wait. You observe. You notice who's being overlooked. You create space for others to speak, and when you do speak, it brings focus. Because you're not adding noise, you're offering direction. This approach also strengthens leadership. Leaders who speak to serve create more trust. Their teams listen more carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect. People follow their lead because their words solve problems. Their presence clarifies the mission. They speak less, but they speak to empower, not to control. Speaking to serve builds credibility over time. You may not be the loudest voice, but you become the most reliable. Others start seeking you out, not for flattery, but for insight, not for performance, but for perspective. You become known for words that calm, words that guide, and words that move people toward action. Even in conflict, this mindset is powerful. You don't argue to be right. You speak to understand. You don't push your view to win. You slow the conversation down. You soften your delivery without weakening your truth. And that calm creates resolution faster than any debate ever could. When your words come from a place of care, they open doors. People lean into them. They feel heard even before they speak. And when you do offer input, it lands with more impact because it carries no self-serving weight. This shift also changes your inner dialogue. You start speaking to yourself the same way. Less criticism, more coaching. Less noise, more insight. You filter your internal words by the same rule. Is this helping me, or just creating more mental clutter? Over time, this discipline becomes your standard. You don't need to constantly monitor yourself. The habit forms. Your speech simplifies. Your conversations deepen. You stop needing to perform. You start choosing purpose in every word. This doesn't mean losing your personality. You still bring your voice, your presence, your humor. But it's anchored in service, not in the need to be noticed. And that anchoring changes how others experience you. You don't need to be flashy. You don't need to dominate. You don't need to impress. You only need to serve with your speech, to help people think more clearly, to make people feel more capable, to bring something that elevates the room, not your image. That's how presence becomes magnetic, not through volume, but through value, not through performance, but through peace. When your words are no longer shaped by the desire to be seen, they begin to shape the world around you, with calm precision, with lasting influence, and with a quiet kind of strength that always speaks loudest. You've just walked through a path few are willing to take, a path of silence, restraint, precision, and presence. A path where your strength no longer lives in how loud you are, but in how deeply you observe, how carefully you act, and how wisely you speak. This isn't just about talking less. It's about thinking more clearly, acting more purposefully, and living with deeper peace. From mastering the pause before reaction to removing the ego from your speech. From letting go of the need to be seen to reclaiming your power through silence. From listening without agenda to speaking only when it serves. You've seen that your words shape your world. And when you begin to speak with intention, or not speak at all, you don't just gain respect, you gain freedom. Now the question is, what will you do next? If this message struck something in you, leave a comment below with the words, "Silence is my strength." Let the world know you're walking a different path, the Stoic path. And if you found real value here, subscribe to the channel for more content that speaks not to your noise, but to your discipline. Quiet minds build loud legacies. Let's build yours together.